blood. That's the first thing we see. Young Dexter, knees slipping in that warehouse floor, tiny hands painted red as he screams in a sound we don't quite hear yet. Smash cut, the same red, years later, reflected in porcelain. Harrison wailing in the blood-filled bathroom, Rita's body just off frame, and Dexter standing there, holding his son like he's the only solid object left in the universe. No narration, just the sound design tightening, the whine of sirens in the distance. Deb's ragged sobs echoing over it all. We cut to Deb on her knees in the shipping container, shoulders shaking, mascara and grief running together. Then to Brian's lifeless body wrapped in plastic, Dexter's face hovering over him, eyes wet but refusing to blink. Back to young Dexter again, staring at the chainsaw, the camera locked on those wide, hollow eyes as the noise swells into a single, suffocating note. Then, finally, Dexter's voice cuts through the chaos. Calm, clinical, people fake a lot of human interactions, but I feel like I fake them all, and I fake them very well. As he insists he doesn't feel, the images betray him. His knees buckling when he finds Rita in the tub, the way his hands shake as he clutches Harrison, blood soaking his shirt, Deb confessing that she's in love with him in the church, Dexter's mask freezing for half a second too long, eyes darting as if he's been cornered by something he can't stab or sedate. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to feel things the way other people do. Over that line, we're not in a kill room. We're in the hospital. Dexter staring at Deb in a coma, the ventilators beeping, syncing with his heartbeat. We jump to him on the boat in the hurricane, that numb stare into the storm, hands steady on the wheel as the world howls back at him. To keep this clear, the montage starts tracing a pattern. Dexter's eyes soften. The plan collapses. He reaches for someone, and the code fractures. Quick flashes, choosing Deb over Lagerda in the shipping container, dropping Lumen's plate when she leaves. Harrison playing in the yard in Iron Lake, while Dexter watches with something that looks suspiciously like hope. Every time the mask slips, the consequences escalate. Each major section will build on this, but here the rule is simple, real feeling, catastrophic fallout. The sound narrows to a low, distant rumble. We land on one final image and hold. Dexter carrying Deb's body out of the hospital, into the storm, the sheet clinging to her, the water lapping at his legs as he disappears into the dark. No music, just wind. Hard cut to black. Over that darkness, his earlier line echoes. Hollow now, I don't have feelings like you do. Then a slow fade back in on empty ocean, gray and endless. In this video, we're going to ask the central question the show keeps dodging. What if the one thing Dexter swore he didn't have, real emotion, was the only thing powerful enough to destroy him from the inside out? So let's kick things off by breaking Dexter's favorite myth, the idea that he's a perfect, clinical predator who only mimics humanity. He tells us he's hollow. He calls himself a monster with a code. But if we actually track his behavior, moment by moment, the fade doesn't just wobble, it fractures. From the very beginning, his entire plan for life is built on that lie. Harry sees a traumatized child and designs a system, channel the urge, follow the code, fake the rest, stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, total control, no feelings. Yet the more we watch, the more that no feelings claim falls apart under investigation. Why does a man who feels nothing care so much about Deb's approval? Why does he keep describing Rita as perfect cover, even as he rearranges his nights to be there for her kids? Here's the thesis that will drive everything in this video. Every single time Dexter actually feels something real, love, guilt, grief, attachment, it doesn't just make his life inconvenient. It rewrites who he is. and it shoves the story onto a new trajectory that he cannot walk back from. Kill Brian to protect Deb, and suddenly the fantasy of being understood by someone like him is gone forever. Fail to protect Rita, and the code stops being a shield and starts feeling like a weapon he turned on his own family. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the spectacular failures of his plans, but on the emotional ruptures underneath them. We're not merely charting kills or plot twists, we're tracking the precise beats where Dexter's narration insists on emptiness, while his choices scream attachment, jealousy, terror, or remorse. When he risks exposure to keep Dokes alive a little longer, when he spares Astor and Cody from the truth, when he clings to Harrison as the one good thing in his life, these are not tactical decisions. They're feelings, breaking through the script Harry wrote for him. So we reframe the entire series, not as the story of a perfect serial killer hiding in plain sight, but as a man at war with feelings he insists he doesn't have, losing ground one crack at a time. Season by season, that war escalates. The code bends. The Dark Passenger loses its clean, clinical edges and becomes a messy psychology of self-justification and fear. Each major section will follow that escalation. Along the way, we'll see how killing his own brother for Deb, choosing Harrison over his Dark Passenger, and finally exiling himself in new blood are not cold calculations. They're the inevitable consequences of emotions he refuses to name until denial is no longer possible, and the illusion of control finally collapses. And that denial starts in a room that never stops screaming. Let's kick things off back in the shipping container. Two boys in a pool of blood, a chainsaw's echo hanging in the air, their mother's body cut apart in front of them. Young Dexter, sitting in that red ocean, crying until his throat shreds, until his body literally can't produce another sound. The show doesn't give us a numb child. It gives us a child whose feelings are so big, they short-circuit. From that image, Dexter later builds a claim. Something inside him died in that container. He's empty now. He can't feel. That's the story he tells us in voiceover, the plan he uses to explain everything that comes after. But that story isn't born in isolation. It's given to him. Enter Harry, a cop, a father, and, in Dexter's mythology, the original architect of control. Faced with a traumatized boy who wakes up screaming, who acts out, who clearly needs therapy, Harry makes a different choice. Instead of healing, he offers a narrative. Dexter isn't hurt. Dexter is broken. He isn't a kid in need of treatment. He's a budding predator whose urges can only be managed, never transformed. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that decision because it functions like the pilot episode of Dexter's psychology. Harry doesn't just teach a code, he rewrites Dexter's identity around it. You can't feel what other people feel. You will always want to kill. You can't change that, but you can channel it. The code becomes both leash and permission slip. To keep this clear, Harry's intervention does two things at once. It gives Dexter rules for survival, and it hands him armor. If he believes he's incapable of real emotion, then anything that looks like attachment is automatically reclassified as camouflage. His bond with Deb? A cover. His protectiveness of Rita and the kids? A clever domestic disguise. Love never has to enter the investigation, because the premise of the code says he can't experience it. But the focus is not just on what Dexter says about himself, it's on what the images betray. Flashbacks show a boy clinging to Harry, desperate for approval, panicking when Harry is disappointed. We see micro-reactions around Deb, small flickers of pride or fear that don't match the flat narration. If this is a child who feels nothing, why does Harry's praise light him up? Why does Harry's disgust, when he sees the bodies in that early season kill room, shatter Dexter so deeply that Harry's later suicide becomes a lifelong wound? There's the contradiction. The narration insists on emptiness. The body language screams need. And as the seasons progress, that gap becomes the central question. What happens when reality refuses to stay inside Harry's story? Along the way, every genuine feeling Dexter experiences will collide with the code that told him those feelings were impossible. The more he clings to the fantasy of being unfeeling, the more violently his world will rupture each time he actually cares. So if reality keeps ripping through Harry's story, we need a way to tell what's real and what's just another chapter in Dexter's performance. Not every smile counts. Not every "I love you" is going on the board. To keep this clear, we're not tallying every time Dexter plays the doting boyfriend with Rita or the loyal brother with Deb. Those are often just good operational moves, part of the plan to stay invisible. The focus is not just on visible emotion, but on cost. Does he pay a price he doesn't have to pay? Does he make a choice that a purely self-preserving predator would never make? In this video, we're going to treat Dexter's inner life as 3 stacked layers. First, there's pure performance, the smiles he practices in the mirror, the small talk at the station, the perfect dad routine at Harrison's birthday. This is what he thinks people want. The mask Harry trained him to wear so the investigation never turns toward him. Under that, there's functional attachment. He cares about Rita, Deb, and even his colleagues, but in a conditional way. They are shelter. Alibis, emotional camouflage. When he protects them or comforts them, it usually tightens his control, reinforces the code, and strengthens the dark passenger's operating environment. It feels warmer, but it's still strategic. Then there's the third layer, the one that interests us, genuine feeling. That's when Dexter moves against his own self-interest, when he weakens his code, complicates his life, or lets the dark passenger lose ground because something in him refuses to treat a person as a prop. These are the moments where the mask doesn't just slip, it fractures. So, how do we test it? Each major section will put specific scenes under a simple pressure check. When Dexter kills Brian at the end of season 1, does that make his life easier or harder? It removes the only person who fully understands him, deepens his isolation, and leaves him with guilt the dark passenger can't fully digest. That's a real feeling, not a clever cover. When he chooses Harrison over running away with Lumen, he's rejecting a partner who fits the code for a child who constantly threatens it. When he yanks Deb's arm and stops her from shooting Hannah, he sabotages the investigation she's built and risks exposure, all because he can't endure Deb crossing that moral line. In each case, his decision undercuts his own structure of control. Along the way, we'll track the long-term consequences. These are not isolated spikes of sentiment. They're emotional debts that come due seasons later, from Rita's death to Deb's collapse in the final stretch. The central question isn't, is Dexter a sociopath? But where does the mask slip so far he can't pull it back up again? And from here, we're going to start at the beginning. The childhood trauma, Harry's code, and the first time Dexter's supposed emptiness fails to explain what he actually does. So if the childhood bloodbath and Harry's training don't actually erase Dexter's emotions, what is he feeling instead? To keep this clear, we can track almost every real crack in his mask along 3 fault lines that keep opening under his supposed control: love and attachment, guilt and grief, and recognition and belonging. Let's kick things off with category 1, love and attachment. On paper, Dexter's plan is simple. Deb is a cover, Rita is a cover, Harrison is a legacy project he can manage. The family fantasy is just camouflage for the investigation closing in around the Bay Harbor butcher. But when it counts, the camouflage wins. He kills Brian, the one person who offers pure acceptance of his darkness. Because Deb is on that table. That's not the code. That's not efficient. That's a brother choosing his sister, even while insisting he can't feel love. We see the same trajectory with Rita. She starts as damaged goods, the perfect low-maintenance girlfriend. By the time he finds her in that bathtub, throat cut by Trinity, the performance is gone. He doesn't calculate. He collapses. The focus is not just on the horror of the image, but on the way it shatters his story about being immune to loss. From that point on, every risk he takes for family is less about Harry's rules and more about this raw, unprocessed attachment he keeps denying. Category 2. Guilt and grief. These are the aftershocks, the deaths he causes or fails to prevent that don't just make him sad, they scramble the system. Rita's murder breaks his domestic plan, but the guilt that follows breaks his psychology. He tries to keep killing like nothing changed, yet his routines slip, his justifications sound thinner, and New Blood later shows him essentially self-exiled, punishing himself with isolation. If he truly felt nothing, why run from everyone who ever loved him? Deb's collapse in the final stretch is the purest version of this. He drags her into his world, then into the investigation, then into the kill room, until her life literally stops because of him. Pulling the plug on her in that hospital is not a clean clinical mercy kill. It's the moment his code, his plans, and his self-image all implode into grief he can't narrate away. Then there's category 3, recognition and belonging. These are the seductive moments where someone looks at Dexter and, for a second, he feels seen. Brian in Season 1, Lumen in Season 5, Hannah later on. Miguel Prado standing in a plastic-lined room, sharing that first kill. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that rush, because it's intoxicating for him. It's also catastrophic. Every time he drops the mask with an ally, the consequences escalate until someone ends up dead, betrayed, or both. Each major section will trace how these 3 fault lines intersect. Love that exposes him, guilt that paralyzes him, recognition that tempts him into new, doomed partnerships. Every major turning point in Dexter's life. From Brian's body in the blood to Iron Lake's final confrontation can be mapped back to one or more of these emotional quakes. And the first real tremor? It starts where he thinks he's safest. Harry, the code, and the lie that all of this was ever under control. So to keep this clear, we're not just going to wander through Dexter's life and point at every time he looks vaguely upset. We're going to build a roadmap, a timeline of rupture. From the humid glow of Miami Metro to the whiteout isolation of Iron Lake, we'll track each moment where an emotion he doesn't have seizes the wheel and yanks his plan off course. In this video, we're going to move season by season, almost like an investigation into Dexter's own psychology. Each major section will anchor itself to 1 to 3 emotional events, not every minor flicker. Early on, that means the first real fracture with Harry's code, and the way Deb's safety quietly outranks every rule he's been given. Later, it's Rita's death, Lumen's departure, Deb's collapse, Harrison's abandonment, and finally, that frozen exile in New Blood. We start in Season 1 with the origin myth, Harry, the code, the lie of emotional emptiness. We'll isolate the scenes where that story breaks. Dexter choosing Deb over Brian, Dexter feeling something disturbingly close to relief in Rita's arms. From there, Season 2 pushes us into the Bay Harbor butcher investigation and Lila. Not because the casework is exciting, but because guilt, exposure, and Leela's warped devotion drag feelings out of him he can't file under mask. Season 3 and 4 escalate the fantasy of control. Miguel Prado, the corrupted apprentice, and then Trinity, the family man mirror. The focus is not just on the kills, but on the domestic moments. Barbecues, baby Harrison. The illusion that Dexter can graft a normal life onto a predatory existence. We'll track the exact beats where affection for Rita and Harrison makes him sloppy, and how that affection turns into the raw, annihilating grief that detonates his trajectory at the end of Season 4. After that, the collapse accelerates. Seasons 5 through 8 become a study in relational failure. Lumen as a temporary redemption arc. Deb learning the truth and trying to love him anyway. LaGuardia's investigation pressing on every weak point in his code. We'll zoom in on the handful of scenes where his love for Deb and Harrison doesn't just complicate the plan, it replaces the plan. With consequences that spill bodies across Miami. Along the way, we're leaving a lot in the background. Routine cases. One-off killers that never touch his self-image. Side characters who orbit the plot but never really penetrate Dexter's armor. If a kill doesn't challenge his belief that he's a monster in control, it stays in the periphery. Finally, we'll follow him into New Blood's snow. Iron Lake, Angela's investigation, Harrison's return. We'll watch how years of denial harden into something that looks like acceptance, and how one last attempt at the code collides with a son who refuses to inherit the lie. Because the central question, the one we'll keep circling back to, is simple. At what point does Dexter stop being a monster pretending to be human, and become a human pretending to be a monster? And when we hit that point, what does he do next? And to really see where that shift begins, we have to go back to the version of Dexter who swears there is no shift to make. Season 1 Dexter is our control sample, the cleanest version of the myth. He narrates his emptiness like a diagnosis, repeats that he cannot feel, and presents his life as a flawless plan, a job that feeds his hobby, a code that keeps him safe, and a girlfriend who will never ask for more. On paper, Rita is perfect, because she's broken. A survivor of abuse, wary of sex, grateful for gentleness. In Dexter's own words, she won't demand real intimacy. That's the psychology he's selling us. But watch the images instead of the narration. The way he checks her bruises with a stiffness that is not just performance. The flash of anger when Paul shows up. The tiny, quiet satisfaction when he realizes she feels safe with him. For a man who claims to feel nothing, he tracks her pain very closely. Why? The same thing is happening with Deb. To keep this clear, Dexter frames her as an obligation. Harry's real child, the one he has to protect because Harry asked him to. He talks about her like a responsibility. Yet the camera keeps catching something else. The protective edge in his eyes when she walks into danger, the way his body tightens when LaGuardia belittles her, the desperation in his voice when she's on the ice truck killer's radar. Responsibility doesn't usually sound that panicked. These are the hairline fractures in the mask. The focus is not just on the big melodramatic moments, but on the routine domestic beats Dexter insists are fake. Making breakfast. Listening to Deb's complaints. Sitting on Rita's couch while the kids play. He tells us this is camouflage. The footage argues it's already becoming comfort. Then Brian appears, and the entire emotional architecture of the season tilts. Here is someone who understands Dexter's darkness completely. No code, no judgment, no need to pretend. Brian speaks his language, reconstructs their childhood crime scene as a love letter, and offers him a life without masks or consequences. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this temptation, because it's the purest version of the fantasy, perfect recognition without restraint. But the central question in Season 1 isn't just whether Dexter will embrace his brother, it's whether that recognition is actually more real to him than Deb's messy, unconditional love. Each major section will escalate this collision, and here it takes its first true form. Deb on a table, plastic wrapped and terrified. Brian beside her, inviting Dexter to choose the bond that feels truest. When Dexter stands between his sister and his brother, that choice will expose the lie at the core of his self-image. If he were truly incapable of love, the decision would be easy. So why isn't it? And what does the cost of that hesitation do to every plan he makes from that moment on? Brian's kill room is the first time Dexter's fantasy and Dexter's family are literally on the same table. Deb strapped down, plastic tight across her throat. Brian moving with that eerie calm, explaining how simple this can all be if Dexter just stops pretending. It's not a fight. It's a presentation, a plan. Brian offers him what Harry never did, total honesty. No code, no mask, no need to fake a laugh at the station or perform boyfriend at Rita's house. Just two brothers, born in blood, reclaiming their shared origin story and turning it into purpose. Choose me, Brian is really saying. Choose the truth over the lie. And, in that moment, Dexter feels the seduction of it. We can see it in the way he relaxes, the way his voice softens. For once, someone isn't investigating him, they're embracing him. To keep this clear, the psychology here matters. Dexter has spent an entire season narrating that he can't feel, that his life is a performance built on Harry's training. Then Brian walks in and names the darkness without fear or disgust. Dexter's fascination is almost childlike, the relief of being seen not as a monster to be managed, but as something perfect, complete. The central question is simple. If this is the belonging he's always craved, why doesn't he take it? From a purely self-preservation standpoint, killing Brian is a failure of logic. Brian is an ideal ally, a skilled killer, no moral hesitation, intimate knowledge of Dexter's trauma. He could share the burden of the dark passenger, offer cover when plans wobble, even help Dexter refine his rituals. If control is the priority, if survival is the only metric, you keep the one person who can anticipate your needs and your threats. But Dexter doesn't. He waits. He pretends to agree. Then he slides the knife into Brian, not Deb. This is not a strategic move. It is an emotional one. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pivot point, because here, Dexter chooses Deb's life and her emotional safety over his own deepest fantasy of acceptance. He protects the sister who thinks he's good from ever knowing how close he came to choosing otherwise. The focus is not just on the body on the table, but on the grief that follows. Dexter's narration insists it was necessary, that Harry's code demanded it, that the investigation left no other option. Yet he lingers over Brian's photos. He revisits their time together in memory. His eyes are haunted in a way the script doesn't name. He has killed the one person who said, "You're not broken," and he feels that loss. Along the way, this unspoken mourning becomes a crack in his supposed emptiness. If he can love Deb enough to kill Brian, what else might he love enough to destroy? And when the next person offers him a version of that same belonging, what happens if he makes the opposite choice? And when he makes the opposite choice, we land in one of the most revealing experiments Dexter ever runs on himself, Rita Bennett as a human shield. On paper, she is perfect. That's Dexter's word, not ours. A woman so traumatized by Paul's abuse that she's disinterested in sex, uninterested in probing questions, and grateful for any stability at all. In his internal investigation of potential girlfriends, she scores high on one metric: minimal demands. No pressure to perform emotionally, no pressure to be fully present. For a man obsessed with control, this looks like an ideal plan. Date Rita, play the role of gentle boyfriend, and hide in plain sight. But to keep this clear, the focus is not just on Dexter's stated rationale. It's on the moments where his behavior betrays a different psychology entirely. Watch his face when Paul shows up high, snarling on the doorstep. The placid mask tightens, the voice drops. There is real anger there, not strategic irritation at a complication in his cover. Rage that someone is terrorizing his family. When he frames Paul with the heroin, the satisfaction is too sharp, too personal, to be just operational. He doesn't only neutralize a threat to his anonymity, he exiles a man who hurt Rita and the kids, and he enjoys it. Then we get the quiet domestic scenes he claims to find baffling. Movie nights on the couch, cooking breakfast with Astor and Cody, Rita's small smiles when something actually goes right. These are shot like breathers in the season's trajectory, but they function as data points. Dexter lingers. He indulges. The narration insists he's only playing along, but the camera catches something else. A man who is, against his own narrative, at peace. Here's the pattern interrupt. If Rita is just camouflage, what does Dexter do when she starts looking directly at him? When she finds the heroin, when she questions his absences, when the story stops making sense, the logical move for a predator obsessed with safety would be to cut her loose. End the relationship. Find a new shield. Instead, he scrambles to repair it. He confesses pieces of his past. He does the emotional labor Harry never trained him for. He chooses risk over retreat. In this video, we're going to keep asking the central question. At what point does self-preservation give way to attachment? With Rita, we can see the line move. He doesn't just protect her because she protects him. He begins to protect her because he cannot tolerate seeing her hurt, even when that hurt would make his own life easier to manage. Each major section will circle this irony, but Rita is the purest version. The woman he chose as a buffer becomes the person he cannot afford to lose. And when the plan finally fails, when that shield is ripped away in blood and tile and silence, the consequences will shatter his illusion of numbness so completely that every relationship after her feels like an echo of a failure he can never undo. Rita's death is the aftershock. But the first real earthquake in Dexter's illusion of numbness hits much earlier, in Season 2, when his past, quite literally, floats to the surface. Let's kick things off with that image. Divers' flashlights cutting through murky water, trash bags splitting open, bones and plastic and tape drifting in slow motion. The ocean that was supposed to erase Dexter's crimes becomes a sunken graveyard, and suddenly, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation isn't some abstract threat. It's his kill rooms turned into crime scenes, his necessary executions turned into nightly news segments, complete with grieving families and FBI briefings. In this video, we're going to treat that shift as the moment Dexter's psychology changes from theoretical to unavoidable. Up to this point, his plan is simple. Follow the code. Kill the right people. Dump the bodies. Maintain control. Now every step of that ritual is reclassified as evidence. The focus is not just on the logistical failure, but on what happens when Dexter has to watch Dokes, Deb, and the entire department react to his work as monstrous. He doesn't just fear exposure, he's forced to see himself through their eyes. Look at his reaction in those early briefings. The camera lingers on Dexter, as Lundy calls the butcher, organized, meticulous, probably law enforcement. Dexter should be proud, right? Instead, we see something else flicker through. Pressure, disorientation, a new kind of weight. When Deb shudders at the idea of a killer dumping bodies in her ocean, When Masaka cracks nervous jokes to cope, Dexter isn't just calculating risk. He's absorbing disgust, directed at a version of himself he can't publicly defend. And into that pressure walks Leela. She is a distorted mirror held up to his crisis. Where Harry's code imposed guilt and limits, Leela offers a seductive counter-theory. You are what you are, so stop apologizing. She reframes every consequence as liberation, every moral hesitation as weakness. To keep this clear, Leela doesn't create Dexter's darkness. She gives him a philosophy that says the investigation, the bodies, even Rita and Deb's fear, are just noise getting in the way of his true self. But the guilt keeps leaking through. It's there when Dexter hesitates with Dokes, when he locks him in that cage and keeps trying to find a non-lethal exit. If Dexter truly felt nothing, why does he keep stalling? Why does framing Dokes feel like a line he has to talk himself across, over and over? Each major section of their cat-and-mouse game ends with Dexter looking less like a predator and more like someone cornered by his own narrative. Then Leela kills Dokes and burns the cabin. Dexter survives. The plan works. And yet, he spirals. He walks through the ashes trying to convince himself this is convenient, that the code is intact because he didn't light the match. But Season 2 marks the first time the stain doesn't wash off. His kills feel heavy now. Not just operationally risky, but morally contaminating. From this point on, every new identity, every new relationship, carries the ghost of the Bay Harbor Butcher, and the next seasons will only deepen that contamination. And no one haunts that contamination more than James Dokes. From the first glare across the bullpen to the parking lot confrontations, Dokes is the one man who never buys the harmless lab geek act. While everyone else laughs with Dexter, Dokes just stares. While others see a quirky blood guy, he feels the wrongness. Instinctively, viscerally, before there's a formal investigation, before there's a name like Bay Harbor Butcher, Dokes' body already knows Dexter is a problem. To keep this clear, Dokes is the inverse of Harry's plan. Harry teaches Dexter that if he controls the optics, if he nails the performance, the world will look away. Dokes refuses to look away. He follows the tension in Dexter's jaw, the way he hovers at crime scenes, the slight delay before a socially appropriate response. That's not evidence. That's animal-level recognition. And Dexter feels it. He's rattled in a way the code doesn't account for. At first, Dexter treats him like any other obstacle. Distract him, frame him, stay 3 steps ahead. But along the way, their cat and mouse rhythm turns into something stranger. Dokes breaks into Dexter's apartment, finds the blood slides, and suddenly the power flips, from a syringe sinking into Dokes' neck in the Everglades to the two of them trapped in that remote cabin. We watch Dexter's supposed control collapse into negotiation, explanation, almost confession. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that cabin, because it's the closest Dexter ever comes to wanting to be understood by someone who hates him. He doesn't just kill Dokes and walk away. He keeps him alive. He feeds him. He talks. He lays out the code like a legal defense, and, underneath that, like a plea. See that I'm not random. See that my violence has rules. Why does he care what Dokes thinks if he truly feels nothing? When Lila blows up the cabin and turns Dokes into the perfect scapegoat, Dexter tells himself this is the best possible outcome. Operationally, it is. The Bay Harbor Butcher case closes. The investigation dies with Dokes. The plan works. And yet, his narration goes quiet, almost funereal. There's no rush, no victory lap, just a dead man whose only real crime was being right about him. The focus is not just on Dexter letting Leela take the blame, but on how he carries Dokes afterward. He visits the memorial. He watches LaGuerta grieve. He admits, in fragments, that Dokes didn't fit the code. Dokes wasn't a monster. He was a soldier, a cop, a man who saw something true and paid for it. This is the first death Dexter can't fully file away in his ritual drawers. The central question becomes, if the code is intact, why does Dokes still echo in later seasons? Why does Dexter's conscience keep circling back to the man who called him out? Because Dokes proves there is a human under the monster mask, and that human is capable of guilt. And once one ghost gets in, what happens when the next death cuts even closer? And once one ghost gets in, what happens when the next death cuts even closer? Let's kick things off with the most dangerous answer the show gives to that question, Lila. A woman who doesn't just tolerate Dexter's darkness, but applauds it. In Season 2, while the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation tightens around his neck, she looks straight at the monster and calls it art. She tells him he's not broken, not diseased, but special. That validation isn't neutral, it's gasoline. She doesn't ask him to control the urge, she asks him to indulge it. From the NA meetings to the fire-damaged loft, the pattern is clear. Leela reframes his addiction as authenticity, his secrecy as oppression, and every consequence as someone else's fault. The focus is not just on her chaos, but on what it does to Dexter's psychology. For the first time, he's not faking vulnerability to maintain a cover. He's confessing, in code, to someone who seems to understand. He calls his killings an addiction, and she leans in. She tells him he's finally being honest. That's the hook. So why is he fascinated? It's not just the danger, the sex, the arson. It's the idea of being fully seen and still desired. Rita loves the mask. Deb loves the brother. Leela loves the whole trajectory, including the parts Dexter insists are unlovable. Along the way, we watch his usual plan for emotional distance collapse. He breaks up with Rita. He skips the code. He lets Lila into spaces that were supposed to be ritual only. This is Dexter, emotionally reckless, not operationally precise. Then, the pattern interrupt. Lila turns her attention to Rita and the kids. She manipulates the investigation, lies to Rita, and finally locks the children in the apartment, lighting the gas. In one horrifying image, Dexter's fantasy of being understood collides with the reality of what that understanding costs. To keep this clear, this is the turning point. When he pulls Aster and Cody out of that inferno, his attachment to Lila snaps into focus. Whatever Lila offers, it's incompatible with the one thing he can't fully deny anymore. He loves this family. His decision to kill Lila in Paris is framed as tying up a loose end, but the central question is, what else is he killing? On that table is not just a stalker and arsonist. It's the version of Dexter that felt euphoric, unmasked, unregulated. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that move. He chooses the code, chooses safety, chooses Rita and the kids over the intoxicating freedom Leela represents. Leela proves something Harry never planned for. Dexter's hunger to be understood can override the code, derail his control, and push him into full emotional failure until love for his family drags him back. And once we've seen him choose them over the high of being seen, the next relationship that tempts him with that same promise is going to hit even harder. And once we've seen him choose them over the high of being seen, the next relationship that tempts him with that same promise is going to hit even harder. Enter Miguel Prado. On paper, Miguel is everything Dexter is not. A charismatic, ambitious assistant district attorney, shaking hands in court, giving speeches about justice, weaponizing the system instead of a bone saw. In the public narrative of this season, he's Miami's moral crusader, leading the investigation. while Dexter is the quiet blood guy in the background. The contrast is deliberate. We're meant to see a man who thrives in the light standing next to a man who survives in the dark. But Miguel has a crack in his armor, a fascination with the cases that slip through, with the killers the law can't quite pin down. And Dexter feels that interest like a tuning fork. What starts as mutual convenience around the Freebo case slowly mutates into something more dangerous, Miguel treating Dexter not just as a useful ally, but as a necessary correction to a broken system. To keep this clear, Dexter's emotional trajectory with Miguel runs on 3 beats: suspicion, thrill, collapse. At first, Miguel is a threat to control, a volatile variable in the investigation. Then, Dexter sees the glint in his eye when he talks about real justice, and the fantasy opens up. What if this is Brian without the chaos? What if this is Leela without the manipulation? What if there's a dark best friend who can share the burden without burning everything down? That fantasy crystallizes on the rooftop. When Dexter walks Miguel through his ritual, plastic wrap fluttering in the night air, blood slides ready, it's not just strategy, it's intimacy. This is the one place Dexter has always been alone, the one plan he never truly shares. Letting Miguel in is a confession without words. I don't want to do this by myself anymore. The focus is not just on the mechanics of the code, but on Dexter's psychology in that moment. He is teaching, yes, but he is also hoping that if Miguel sees the structure, the rules, the restraint, he'll finally be understood, not just used. And then Miguel breaks it. He uses the code as a license, not a limit. He kills Ellen Wolf out of personal vengeance, dresses it up as justice, and throws Dexter's sacred system back at him as cover. This isn't a simple operational failure or a bad apprentice. For Dexter, it feels like a personal rejection and a desecration. Miguel didn't just misunderstand the rules, he corrupted the one thing Dexter thought made his darkness bearable. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern. Dexter reaches for connection, and the connection turns into a monster. Miguel teaches him a brutal distinction. Being seen is not the same as being known. Recognition without real understanding doesn't heal Dexter's isolation, it weaponizes it. Along the way, he learns that his desire to share the code doesn't just reveal hidden killers, it can create them. And once that lesson is burned in blood, the next time Dexter opens his world to someone, it won't be a colleague or a lover. It'll be a survivor who looks him in the eye and asks to join the hunt. Lumen asks to join the hunt. Rita asks for something much stranger from Dexter Morgan, a forever. And the terrifying part is that by the time we reach the wedding, he almost wants it more than the hunt itself. Let's kick things off with the build-up, because Season 4 turns Dexter's life into a 3-ring circus. He's chasing Trinity, managing Miguel's fallout, juggling night feedings and school runs, all while insisting in narration that Rita is just the perfect cover. A house in the suburbs, a baby monitor humming while he sharpens knives. On paper, it's the ideal camouflage plan. But the more he invests in fixing the leaky pipes, soothing Rita's fears, and actually showing up for family photos, the harder it is to pretend this is only an operation, not an attachment. To keep this clear, Dexter frames his pre-wedding anxiety as logistics. Can a serial killer maintain control with a wife, 3 kids, and a mortgage? Where will he store the slides? How will he slip out at night without blowing the cover? He talks like an engineer troubleshooting a system. Yet underneath that procedural language, we can feel the real pressure point. What happens if he fails people he has started to genuinely care about? The central question isn't just, can I keep killing? It's what if my failures don't just expose me, but destroy them? At the ceremony, that tension finally shows on his face. This is not the cool, detached technician we've watched dissect crime scenes. His hands shake, his posture softens. When he looks at Rita walking down the aisle, the mask doesn't crack so much as melt. His narration, usually so clinical, actually stumbles around the word love, circling it, qualifying it, trying to keep it in quotation marks, even as his expression gives it away. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to moments like this, where his voiceover clings to the code while his body language tells on him. The focus is not just on Dexter gaining a deeper cover. The wedding marks the first time he actively chooses a life that limits his killing, rather than simply hides it. Every vow, every promise to be there for Rita and the kids is a voluntary restriction on his freedom to hunt. He builds a fence around his own darkness because he wants what's inside that house: Harrison's crib, Astor's trust, Rita's belief that he is good. And that's where the trajectory turns ominous. The more real this domestic dream becomes, the higher the stakes when his darkness leaks through. What happens when a life designed to contain the monster becomes the thing the monster inevitably destroys? The investigation into that question starts the moment he says "I do," and the consequences are closer than anyone in that church can see. The wedding promise barely settles before the show hands Dexter a darker, older version of that same dream. A man who's already pulled it off. Or so it seems. Enter Arthur Mitchell. Trinity, a serial killer with a decades-long streak, a devoted family, a church community, a life that looks stable. From the first time Dexter watches him blend into a prayer circle after staging a ritual murder, we're watching Dexter see his future, not as a warning, as a blueprint. To keep this clear, Trinity isn't just another target in an investigation. He's a revelation. Here is someone who kills with meticulous ritual, returns to the same cycle over and over, and still goes home to a wife, 2 kids, and a neat little suburban house. Dexter's plan has always been short-term: follow the code, dump the bodies, survive the week. Arthur represents something Harry never gave him: a model for long-term control, and Dexter is in awe. He stalks Arthur not with the usual clinical detachment, but with envy. He inserts himself into Arthur's life, apprentices under him, even calls him a teacher. The psychology here matters. Harry taught Dexter how to fake normal. Arthur seems to embody a version of normal that actually coexists with the darkness. The central question for Dexter becomes painfully simple. If Trinity can do this for 30 years, why can't I? Then Harrison is born, and that question stops being theoretical. The stakes get a face, a crib, a future. Dexter is no longer just maintaining a cover with Rita and the kids. He's holding his son in his arms, feeling a pull he doesn't have words for. He tells himself it's about legacy, about giving Harrison a safe life Harry never gave him. But we can see the fracture forming. This isn't just strategy, it's attachment. That's where Trinity's mentorship turns into a pattern interrupt. Because when Dexter steps inside Arthur's home, the illusion collapses. The terror in Jonah's eyes, the bruises, the wife walking on eggshells, the daughter trapped in a house that feels like a kill room stretched over years. All that apparent balance was never balance, it was a slow-motion crime scene. The focus is not just on Trinity's violence, but on what it does to Dexter's fantasy. If Arthur's family is this broken, what does that say about Dexter's own plan to be both predator and protector? Can he really believe his darkness will spare Harrison when Arthur's has poisoned everything it touches? Each major section will keep tightening this noose. Dexter decides he can eliminate Trinity, cleanly end the threat, and rush back to the life he's building. One last kill, then back to the birthday parties. But the season is already answering the question we started with. You don't get to quarantine a monster in the same house where your child sleeps. By the time Dexter finally corners Arthur, the consequences of that fantasy are already waiting for him at home. By the time Dexter walks out of that garage, Arthur Mitchell wrapped in plastic and bleeding out, we think we've seen the win condition. The investigation is over, the threat neutralized, the plan executed with clinical precision. Trinity is dead. Miami is safe. The family fantasy survives. Then Dexter walks into his own house. The phone ringing. Rita's purse on the counter. That eerie, echoing quiet. From the moment he hears Harrison's distant cry, the entire trajectory of the series snaps. He follows the sound down the hall, opens the bathroom door, and the image hits like blunt force. Rita in the bathtub, throat cut, water pink and still. Harrison on the floor, sitting in a pool of blood, wailing. It's the origin scene replayed, not in a shipping container, but in the heart of the life he thought he was protecting. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what we see, but on what happens to Dexter's face. First, absolute shock. His body doesn't rush to Harrison. It freezes. His eyes go wide, then hollow, like the system has crashed. This is not the poised, narrating predator. This is a man whose entire internal model of control has just imploded. When he finally scoops Harrison up, the breakdown is delayed, almost childlike. The words won't come. The breathing stutters. It's as if his nervous system is trying to reboot in a world where his code has failed at the most basic level. Keep them safe. And the staging is deliberate. Harrison sitting in blood exactly as Dexter once did. A perfect visual rhyme that detonates decades of compartmentalization in a single shot. That red floor is not just gore. It's a corridor straight back to his mother's murder, to Harry finding him, to the birth of the dark passenger. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern, the past refusing to stay in the past, reappearing as a consequence of Dexter's own choices. Here, history isn't just repeating, he has become the vector. Because notice what he does not do. He doesn't immediately curse Trinity, or the police, or bad luck. The central question in his eyes is simpler and far more devastating. What did I do? He understands almost instantly that Rita is in that tub because he kept killing, because he believed he could run a serial murder career and a suburban household in parallel without the lines ever crossing. The failure isn't just operational, it's moral. He brought the monster home. This is the moment his I don't really feel narrative dies. The grief is too raw, too disorienting to be written off as performance. There is love in that collapse. There is guilt so heavy it will eventually drive him into self-imposed exile. Along the way, we'll see him try to reassert the old story, to act like the dark passenger is still in charge. But from Rita's bathtub on, that's a lie he can't fully believe anymore. And once he can feel this much, the code stops being armor and starts becoming a sentence. Once the code feels like a sentence, we're primed for the one experiment that almost convinces Dexter he might deserve parole. That's where Lumen walks in. Not as another predator he can neatly wrap in plastic, but as a survivor shaking on a blood-stained floor, looking at him with terror and recognition. She doesn't mirror his hunger. She mirrors his damage. Let's kick things off with that difference, because it's crucial to the psychology of this season. Leela and Miguel are attracted to Dexter's darkness. They want in on the thrill, the power, the illusion of control. Lumen wants something else entirely. Justice, safety, a way to stop waking up in the same nightmare. The central question for Dexter quietly shifts from who can share my kill ritual to can I protect someone without destroying them? To keep this clear, watch how his plan with Lumen never looks like his usual apprenticeship model. With Miguel, he hands over knives and trash bags. With Lumen, He hands over food, clothes, a safe house. He hides her from the investigation, patches her wounds, and walks her step by step through the reality of what they're about to do. He teaches her the code not as a license, but as a guardrail, talking about evidence, consequences, and the line between victim and monster. He isn't just managing a partner, he's caring for a person. That care changes the texture of their kills. In the Barrel's case, every name they cross off is tied to Lumen's body, Lumen's memory, Lumen's shaking breath on the kill room plastic. The focus is not just on the logistics of the murder, but on the shared pain driving it. When they stand over a table together, it's not like Miguel, where ego and control are constantly in play. It's two traumatized people trying to make the world slightly less unbearable, and for once Dexter can tell himself his darkness is being used for something unambiguously right. Or is it? Then comes the morning after they sleep together. Sunlight in the kitchen. Harrison babbling. Lumen moving through Dexter's domestic space like she belongs there. His narration softens. We hear a fragile hope that maybe he isn't just the sum of his urges, that someone can see the knives, the blood, the code, and still choose him. It's the closest he ever gets to believing that a shared darkness could leave both people better instead of ruined, which is exactly why her departure hits so hard. She doesn't betray him. She heals enough that the need to kill fades, and with it, the bond. For Lumen, that's redemption. For Dexter, it's abandonment with a moral lesson attached. His feelings are real enough that their collapse leaves a scar, proof that he can be hurt when love doesn't last forever. And once we've seen that, we have to ask, what happens when the next person he loves can't simply walk away? So when we get to that dockside morning after the Barrel Girl revenge is done, the show finally answers that question. What happens when the person who shares his darkness doesn't betray him or die, but heals? We're in the quiet aftermath. No kill room, no plastic, just sunlight, the sound of water, and Lumen telling Dexter the one thing he never expected to hear. Her darkness is gone. She says it gently, but it's a death sentence for the life they just built. The mission is complete. The plan worked. And because it worked, she no longer needs to kill. That also means she no longer needs him in the same way. The partnership, the shared purpose, the vigilante fantasy of being a righteous duo that collapses in a single conversation. For Lumen, this is closure. For Dexter, it's a reminder that his dark passenger is not a phase, it's a life sentence. To keep this clear, we need to pay attention to what he doesn't do. He doesn't bargain. He doesn't pivot into a new plan to keep her close. He doesn't weaponize guilt or trauma to drag her back into the blood. Instead, he listens. He absorbs the blow. He accepts that her ability to walk away is not a failure of loyalty, but a sign that the investigation into her own trauma is finally over. This is where the psychology gets interesting. Dexter has spent an entire season telling us that Lumen is the first person who truly sees him. Harry's code taught him that he was unlovable without rules and secrecy. Lumen blows that up by loving him inside the darkness. And then she leaves anyway, not because he slipped, not because he lost control, but because she got better. The central question becomes, will he interpret that as rejection or as proof that someone can actually escape what he never could? He answers it in that small, devastating line about understanding. He tells her he gets it. He recognizes that her capacity to stop killing is health, not judgment. That's a level of nuanced emotional awareness we're not supposed to believe he has. In this video, we're going to keep arguing that these moments matter more than any monologue about being a monster, because here, his actions contradict his myth. This is a rare, selfless pivot in Dexter's trajectory. He prioritizes Lumen's future over his own terror of being alone with the passenger. He doesn't turn this loss into a justification for more violence. He lets her go. That's not the Bay Harbor butcher. That's a man in quiet, mature heartbreak, holding his grief instead of externalizing it. And along the way, the show slips us a pattern interrupt. If he can feel this loss and not kill because of it, then maybe he's never been the emotionless predator he claims to be. This goodbye plants a seed. The next time love is threatened, will he stay this selfless, or will the need not to lose someone finally break the code completely? That question hangs in the air as we move into season 6, where the show does something unexpected. It lets Dexter brush up against Faith, not as a joke, not as camouflage, but as a genuine pressure test of whether there's anything in him that could be forgiven. Let's kick things off with Brother Sam. On paper, he's everything Dexter's psychology rejects. A former gang member, once a killer himself, now running an auto shop and a small ministry, radiating this unnerving calm. He talks about God's plan, about redemption, about light and darkness, like they're both still in play. For someone who believes his own trajectory was locked in a blood-soaked shipping container, this is almost offensive. Dexter's first response is pure investigation. He approaches Sam as a potential target, assuming the redemption arc is just another mask. Another predator hiding behind a story. We watch him stalk, probe, test, but the failure comes early. Sam refuses to fit the pattern. He protects a volatile ex-con employee instead of discarding him. He takes a beating without retaliation. He looks at Dexter, this stranger with dead eyes, and doesn't see a monster to be exposed or used. He sees a man who could still change. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these small concrete ruptures in Dexter's control. Because in season 6, the focus is not just on apocalyptic religious theatrics. It's on a quiet counter-sermon happening in that shop. Dexter changes oil. He jokes a little. He lets Harrison be around Sam. And in those scenes, his body language softens, his voice drops. It's as if he's running an experiment. What happens if someone sees me and doesn't recoil? To keep this clear, Brother Sam is not Lumen, not Miguel, not Lila. He's not excited by the darkness, not trying to weaponize it or purge it. He looks straight at Dexter's violence and still insists there is more to him. The central question becomes, if even one person he respects believes there's light in him, how long can Dexter cling to the narrative that he's pure void? The answer crystallizes when Sam is shot. Dexter does what we expect. He hunts the shooter with the old ritualistic precision. Stalk the target. Prepare the kill room. Deliver Harry's code. But Sam, dying in a hospital bed, interrupts the ritual from beyond the kill table. He asks Dexter to forgive instead of kill. He says explicitly, "There's light in you, not just darkness." It's a direct challenge to the dark passenger myth, spoken by the only mentor figure Dexter has, who isn't trying to manage him. Dexter doesn't fully accept it. He still kills in anger. He still lets Travis Marshall become the main obsession of the season. But Sam's death leaves a mark that doesn't fade with the doomsday investigation. When Dexter grieves, when he watches the water after scattering Sam's ashes, we see it. This loss hurts. And it hurts differently. Each major section will show Dexter being recognized as a monster. Brother Sam is the rare inversion. He recognizes Dexter's capacity for good and says it out loud. The consequences of that are slow burn. Later, when Dexter thinks about being a father, about what Harrison might inherit, Sam's words are there, haunting him. If there's light, then there's responsibility. If there's light, then he can't pretend every failure was inevitable. Along the way, that single seed of belief becomes dangerous. Because the next time Dexter's world is threatened, the question won't just be, how do I survive? It will be, what would the version of me that Brother Sam saw actually do? And that gap between who he is and who he might have been is where the next collapse begins. And once that gap opens up between who Dexter is and who he might have been, Harrison walks straight into it. We go from Brother Sam's makeshift baptism to something even more destabilizing. Bedtime stories, sippy cups, and a serial killer holding a toddler like he's made of glass. In those early scenes with Harrison, Dexter's whole body changes. The shoulders drop, the voice softens. The camera lingers on him, tracing tiny curls of hair, adjusting a blanket, standing in a doorway longer than he needs to. From a man who treats most human contact as camouflage, this is not just performance. This is attachment. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Dexter playing dad as part of a plan to look normal. It's on the micro moments where that plan dissolves. Rocking Harrison to sleep after Rita's death. Kneeling on the floor, making goofy faces with plastic toys. Watching his son waddle around in footy pajamas while the dark passenger goes quiet for once. These are not strategic moves. These are the rare times control gives way to something raw, and he doesn't immediately pathologize it. The terror shows up the second Harrison pushes back. A tantrum, a flash of anger, a rough shove on the playground. Instantly, Dexter's psychology goes into full investigation mode. He doesn't see a normal kid testing boundaries. He sees a replay of his own origin story. Blood, chainsaw, shipping container. The moment his own trajectory snapped, the central question in his mind isn't, how do I parent this? It's, did I already break him? So when Harrison puts on those angel wings for the school pageant, the symbolism is almost cruel. White feathers. Halo, a child literally costumed as innocence, framed in warm light, while Dexter watches with hands that have wrapped plastic, tied knots, driven knives home. The shot hangs there as if the universe is mocking the code, the killer in the crowd, the angel on stage. And Dexter's face does something rare. It flickers between pride, awe, and sheer panic. In this video, we're going to keep returning to moments like this, because they expose the real collapse under the surface. Dexter isn't just afraid of getting caught. He's afraid of contaminating Harrison by proximity alone. Stay close, and he might teach his son to channel the darkness, pull away, and he abandons the one person who makes him feel anything pure. That internal debate is brutally self-sacrificial. He genuinely considers exiling himself from his own child as a twisted act of protection. Each major section will trace how that love keeps sabotaging the code. With Harrison, every decision has double consequences. One for the investigation board. One for the boy with angel wings. And the more Dexter feels, the less his old rules hold. The question is, when the dark passenger and the father finally collide, which part of him will Harrison actually see? And then we hit season 7, where that question about what Harrison will see is ripped open by the one person who has always seen Dexter the most. Deb, not in theory, not in suspicion, in a church, at night, with Travis Marshall's Saran wrapped to an altar, and Dexter's knife already coming down. Concrete image first, stained glass, plastic sheeting, firelight from the doomsday tableau. Debra Morgan walks in, gun raised, and watches her brother stab a man through the heart. In that instant, the last barrier between Dexter's two lives doesn't crack. It disintegrates. The person he loves most is now standing in the kill room he thought she'd never enter. The central question becomes brutally simple. When control is gone, does Dexter protect the code, or does he protect Deb? His immediate response is our answer. He doesn't run. He doesn't lunge at her with the knife. He doesn't try to spin some elaborate plan about self-defense. He says it. I'm a serial killer. Piece by piece, across those first episodes, he keeps choosing confession over concealment, even when every new detail makes the investigation around them more dangerous. To keep this clear, we need to track two trajectories at once: Dexter's operational failure and Deb's psychological collapse. She starts in pure horror, dragging him off the altar, trying to force him into rehab, into the language of addiction. Then the compromises begin. Sitting in the car, outside a kill, watching him tape a victim, helping him burn the church. Each step is a line she swore she'd never cross, and each step is one he could have prevented by cutting her out. But he doesn't. The focus is not just on survival anymore. We watch Dexter reorient his internal calculus from how do I avoid exposure to how do I keep Deb from breaking. He lies about small things to shield her, not the way he used to lie to Rita, but with this frantic awareness that her sanity is now collateral damage of his entire life's design. Then LaGuerta finds the blood slide at Travis's scene, and the investigation snaps everything into a new shape. Bay Harbor Butcher reopened, evidence re-examined. Deb's gas receipt at the church. Suddenly, Dexter's war with exposure isn't abstract. Deb is on the board. Every decision he makes around LaGuerta now carries double consequences. One for his freedom, one for Deb's badge, career, and eventual prison time. Pattern interrupt. If Dexter truly felt nothing, wouldn't LaGuerta be a simple problem to solve? Kill the threat, clean the scene, move on. Instead, the season bends around his refusal to let Deb pay his price. He frames others, manipulates evidence, and only when every workaround fails does he engineer that final confrontation in the shipping yard. In this video, we're going to come back to that climax, because it's where all these feelings turn lethal. When Deb walks into yet another kill room and has to choose between LaGuerta and Dexter, the love that once made him human detonates into an irreversible tragedy that neither the code nor any plan can contain. So we finally get to that dock. Cold concrete, harsh floodlights, LaGuerta with her gun leveled, the investigation she's been building all season crystallized into one impossible command: Deborah, put him down. This is not a theoretical collapse of Dexter's control anymore. This is the moment his entire mythology is forced into a single, shattering choice for the person he loves most. Dexter is on his knees, literally and psychologically. His plan to frame LaGuerta has failed. The code has failed. Every workaround has funneled him to this pier, and when Deb steps into the scene, gun shaking, eyes wide, we feel the entire trajectory of their relationship slam into the present. The mentor who made her a cop on one side, the brother who made her feel safe on the other. Who is she if she pulls the trigger either way? Here's the crucial beat. Dexter doesn't lunge, doesn't manipulate, doesn't reach for another clever angle. He offers himself. Do what you gotta do. He tells Deb to shoot him, to end it, to stop the consequences from spreading any further. For once, the central question in his mind is not, how do I escape, but how do I stop destroying her? It is a rare, clear moment of self-sacrifice from a man who has spent entire seasons justifying survival as necessity. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on LaGuerta dying. It's on Deb dying in front of us while she stays standing. The sobbing, the hysterical "I can't," the way her arm swings between them like a metronome, counting down the last seconds of her moral center. When she finally fires into LaGuerta, Dexter watches the light go out in two women at once. LaGuerta's body hits the ground. Deb's sense of herself as a good cop, a good person, collapses in real time. We can see Dexter register it. This isn't like Brian, where killing his brother to save Deb could still be folded into the code. This is different. He hasn't just cost another life, he has corrupted the one person whose belief in justice, in the badge, in the idea that people can be better, once anchored his own fragile psychology. Along the way, he's told himself that his love protects Deb. On that dock, he realizes his love has weaponized her. And the aftermath proves it. Deb's panic attacks, the drinking, the disgust when she looks at him in later episodes, those aren't random breakdowns. They are the ongoing investigation of that single shot echoing through her mind. Dexter can no longer pretend the code keeps innocents safe. Deb is innocent, and she is ruined precisely because he refused to walk away when LaGuerta closed in. In this video, we're going to track how this dock scene becomes the hinge of Dexter's entire emotional arc. Each major section will follow the same pattern we see here. He reaches for love, believes he can compartmentalize, and instead triggers another irreversible failure. Because after Deb pulls that trigger, we can't unsee the truth. When Dexter's love collides with his darkness, it doesn't save people, it destroys them. And that realization is what will haunt him all the way to his final choice with Harrison. After Deb pulls that trigger, Dexter doesn't just lose his sister's innocence, he loses his last clean excuse. So when we enter season 8, we're not meeting the same confident hunter from the early years. We're meeting a man who is exhausted by his own pattern, quietly wondering if the only plan left is to become someone else entirely. He talks about it almost like a vacation brochure. Leave Miami. Leave the blood spatter. Leave the code. Take Harrison and Hannah and disappear into some anonymous small town where no one is running an investigation with his blood slides at the center. It sounds simple. It sounds clean. It sounds like control. But the central question is obvious. Who is Dexter Morgan when he's not the Bay Harbor butcher in disguise? That's where Dr. Vogel walks in, watching him like a specimen she misplaced years ago. In dark offices and on quiet walks, she calls him a perfect psychopath, a design she helped Harry refine. On paper, it should be flattering. Another justification. Another structure. Yet look at his face when she says it. The defensiveness. The sharp, almost childish, I do care about my sister. The flicker of hurt when she frames his entire life as a clinical experiment. To keep this clear, the label doesn't settle him. It destabilizes him. For years, Dexter has used the code as a moral shield and a psychological script. Vogel reframes it as data, as manipulation, as a way Harry managed a weapon. Suddenly, Dexter's identity as a necessary monster collapses into the possibility that he was never special, just damaged and directed. That's why he keeps circling back to Deb, even when she's drowning in guilt and pills instead of paperwork. Their relationship in this season is a wreckage site. Deb avoids him, lashes out, tries to drink and drive her way out of the memory of that shipping container. She says she wishes he had died instead of LaGuerta. She means it, and yet Dexter keeps showing up, at her work, at her apartment, in the middle of her spirals. He postpones his escape plan again and again, because leaving while Deb is broken feels like a different kind of murder. Then there's Hannah, the one person who knows the full ledger and still reaches for his hand. She doesn't need the mask, the fake hobbies, the rehearsed empathy Harry taught him. With Hannah, Dexter can talk about the urge to kill and the urge to protect in the same breath. And she doesn't flinch. She offers a future where he is fully seen, where the dark passenger is not a secret to be managed, but a trait to be accommodated. Isn't that the fantasy he's been chasing since Brian, Miguel, even Lumen? In this video, we're going to keep returning to that tension. Dexter honestly believes that love might overwrite the code, that if he can just choose Hannah and Harrison loudly enough, everything he's done will stop echoing. Each major section will show how that belief collides with reality, because while Dexter is dreaming about passports and new identities, something else is tightening around him. Deb's unraveling, Vogel's agenda, the mounting consequences of Lagerda's death, and waiting at the center of that storm is a choice that will finally prove whether love can save him, or only give him one more person to lose. And that choice leads us straight to the wound the show never really lets us look away from. Deb's death isn't a twist, it's the bill coming due for every time Dexter believed he could bend reality around his needs and walk away clean. Let's kick things off with the decision that seals her fate. In the middle of the escape plan with Hannah and Harrison, passports ready, future mapped out, Dexter peels away from the airport and heads back for Oliver Saxon. He tells himself it's about protecting them, about control and closure. But we can see the psychology underneath. He cannot tolerate an unresolved enemy. The code, the investigation, the man who shot Deb in that parking lot, Dexter needs to make that feeling go away, more than he needs the plane to leave on time. In the shootout, Deb is hit. One bullet. One miscalculation. She survives the surgery, she's talking, she's joking about being a terrible cop who keeps getting shot. For a moment, the series plays into Dexter's favorite fantasy, that damage is reversible, that consequences can be managed if he just works the problem hard enough. He stands by her bed and believes, with the same stubborn faith he's brought to every plan, that he can still fix what he's broken. Then, the storm hits, the clot forms, and he walks into that ICU room to find her effectively gone. No dramatic death speech, no last confession, just machines, a flat affect, and a doctor explaining that Deb is brain dead. Watch his face here, the numb disbelief, the way his voice cracks when he tries to argue, as if this is another system he can outthink. This is the moment where the central question of the entire series finally answers itself. What happens when there is no code? No justification? No enemy he can stab to make the pain make sense? To keep this clear, Deb's death is not framed as an accident of fate. Dexter explicitly connects it to his presence in her life. So, when he turns off her life support, it's both an act of love and a verdict. He won't leave her as a body in a hospital bed, tagged and processed like one more piece of evidence in someone else's investigation. He carries her to the boat, lays her on the water like every other victim he's dumped, and in doing that, he quietly admits she belongs on that list. The focus is not just on the tragedy, but on the trajectory. Deb's death is the emotional endpoint of every earlier compromise. Killing Brian instead of walking away, letting Leela clean up Dokes, murdering Lagerda to save himself. Each time he chose his darkness and told himself love would survive the fallout. Here, love doesn't survive. It drowns with her. And yet, this isn't the last time Dexter will run from the wreckage he created. The next phase of his collapse depends on that same wound, and on the one person left who still carries his blood. Deb is gone. The ventilator is silent. Miami is drowning in wind and rain while Dexter stands on his boat, the slice of life, with nothing left to anchor him. From here on, every frame looks like an escape plan, but under it. The psychology is something closer to a slow-motion confession. He calls Hannah. He calls Harrison. His voice is steady, but not empty, has that thick, underwater quality we only hear when the narration drops its ironic distance. He doesn't give them instructions for a new identity, doesn't outline a strategy or a code. He just tells his son that he loves him, that Hannah will keep him safe. Then he hangs up, turns his back on the only future he's ever admitted he wanted, and steers directly into the storm. On paper, this looks like a classic Dexter maneuver. New environment, new name, new control. But listen to what he tells us. He doesn't narrate like a predator slipping the investigation. He narrates like a contagion going into quarantine. He calls himself a curse. He insists that everyone he loves dies because of him. The focus is not just on the danger he poses as a killer, but on the emotional wreckage he believes his love creates. To keep this clear, we have to sit with the central question. In that moment, is Dexter trying to die or trying to disappear? The hurricane gives him cover for both. If he drowns, Harrison is free of him forever. If he survives and fakes his death, Harrison still grows up believing his father is gone. Either way, the intention is the same. Remove himself from the board. Remove the variable that keeps blowing up every plan. That's not cold detachment. That's self-loathing with a steering wheel. It's the culmination of every consequence he's been outrunning since season 1. Brian's body in the container, Rita in the bathtub, Lagerda on the dock, Deb on that hospital gurney. Each loss tightens the noose on his illusion of control until the only solution he can see is subtraction. Not one more victim. Not one more sister dragged into his darkness. Just absence. And then we cut to the lumberyard. No triumphant reveal. No clever monologue about beating the system. Just Dexter alive, bearded, moving through a gray, joyless routine in some anonymous corner of the world. He doesn't hunt. He doesn't connect. He doesn't even pretend to be normal. His survival reads less like an escape and more like a sentence he's imposed on himself. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that image because it reframes his entire trajectory. This is not the monster winning. This is a man who feels so deeply responsible for the collapse of everyone around him that the only future he accepts is one stripped of family, intimacy, and even purpose. For Dexter, exile is the only punishment that fits the crime of loving people he inevitably destroys. And as we'll see next, that belief doesn't stay buried forever. It waits, festers, and eventually follows him all the way to Iron Lake. That belief doesn't just follow him to Iron Lake. It builds the entire life he's pretending to live there. Snow, silence. A man named Jim Lindsay jogging the same path every morning, scanning for deer instead of targets. The cabin is neat, isolated, almost surgical in its order. The butcher block is clean, the knives are lined up, the fireplace is controlled flame instead of plastic-wrapped carnage. On the surface, this is Dexter's final plan for control. No family, no code, no kills, just routine. But if we look closer, the emptiness is a performance. He works at the tiny hunting store, chats with locals, dates the police chief, he smiles on cue, he remembers names, he brings donuts. Yet every interaction is measured, rehearsed, held at arm's length. The focus is not just on what he's doing now, but on what he's refusing to do. Investigate, stalk, select, execute. He treats abstinence like a new religion. To keep this clear, New Blood opens with a man who has designed his days to erase himself. Same breakfast, same drive, same jokes. The ritual has shifted from kill rooms to customer service, but the psychology is identical. If he follows the pattern, nothing unpredictable can break through. No victims, no witnesses, no attachments. It's the exile fantasy upgraded into a lifestyle brand. And still, the mask slips. The way his eyes linger on a rifle too long. The way his breathing changes when a careless hunter brags about a wounded animal. The way he rehearses the word no in the mirror, as if refusing his dark passenger requires its own script. He hasn't stopped feeling temptation or fear. He's just buried them under snow and small talk. Then Harrison walks in, not metaphorically, literally, A teenage boy with his mother's eyes and Dexter's history appears in this carefully frozen world, and the impact is seismic. Shock hits first. Then, terror. Then something Dexter has spent an entire season of his life denying, longing for recognition, for forgiveness, for a chance to not be the man who abandoned his own child. In this video, we're going to treat Harrison's arrival as the ultimate investigation into Dexter's lie about being empty. Dexter insists on distance. He tells himself he's protecting the boy from the monster. He fumbles, stalls, even tries to send Harrison away. But that hesitation is soaked in shame. What if Harrison sees him? Not the cover identity, the collapse, the trail of bodies, broken promises, dead mothers, dead sisters. Each major section will show how new blood turns into a final test. Can Dexter maintain this blank, controlled existence when the one bond he couldn't sever is standing on his doorstep, asking for a father? Or does loving Harrison drag him back into the same patterns of secrecy, violence, and rationalized failure he crossed a continent to escape? Because once father and son start circling each other in Iron Lake, the question isn't whether feelings will return, it's which feeling will kill them first. Harrison walks into Iron Lake, and almost immediately, Dexter's favorite myth collapses. The myth that he can keep feelings in quarantine, that he can build a new identity with no attachments. That fatherhood is a chapter he closed with that hurricane. Suddenly, the son he abandoned is standing in front of him, and the dark passenger has to share space with something far more dangerous: hope. At first, Dexter clings to control with those painfully awkward conversations, stiff small talk in the diner, stilted apologies that sound more like legal statements than love. But then we watch the thaw, a shared joke about wrestling, a hunting trip where Dexter's lecture about gun safety accidentally turns into real parenting. Little moments where his face changes before he can narrate it away, lighting up with this unplanned, unpracticed pride. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what he says to Harrison, but on what his body betrays before the words arrive. And then the pattern interrupt hits. Harrison isn't just a wounded kid. He's violent. He breaks the bully's arm. He talks about feeling empty and angry. Dexter's internal investigation goes into overdrive. Is this his fault? Is this genetics? Trauma? The code echoing through another generation? We can feel the terror under every calculated move. He's torn between two plans that cannot coexist: mentor the darkness or smother it before it blooms. That tension is where Dexter's psychology gets exposed. He sees Harrison's rage at abusers, bullies, and hypocrites, and it resonates almost too cleanly with Harry's code. When they talk about people who deserve it, when Harrison fantasizes about hurting those who hurt others. Dexter doesn't just see a problem. He sees a potential partner, a shared mission. The central question for him becomes, is this the ultimate proof he was right all along, or the ultimate evidence that his life is a contagion? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that double edge. Every time Dexter leans into the fantasy of a father-son vigilante team, the consequences spike. Harrison's darkness tempts Dexter to rewrite the code in real time, to justify dragging his child into the same secret war that already destroyed one family. That's why his confession in New Blood is so monumental. No plastic, no table, no rehearsed mask, just a father telling his son he is the Bay Harbor butcher. It's a deliberate surrender of control, a plan with no exit strategy. He risks total rejection, prison, even death, because for once, honesty with Harrison matters more than survival. Harrison becomes the clearest mirror of Dexter's capacity for love, but also the clearest reminder of the damage that love, fused with secrecy and violence, can do. Their bond is real. Their bond is lethal. And as we'll see next, once Harrison understands the full truth, that love doesn't save Dexter's life. It becomes the weapon that finally ends it. So when Harrison finally raises the rifle in that clearing, we're not just watching a climax. We're watching every lie Dexter ever told about control, about the code, about who he really is, collapse in real time. The confrontation starts with a simple, devastating fact. Harrison has done the investigation Dexter never did on himself. He knows about Logan, an innocent man, a cop, a father. Harrison doesn't just hear Dexter's rationalizations, he tracks the trajectory. Rita, Deb, LaGuerta, anyone pulled into Dexter's orbit ends up dead or broken. The pattern is no longer abstract psychology or a tragic coincidence. It's a trail of bodies that follows one man's plan to turn murder into a moral system. Dexter does what he's always done. At first, he reaches for the code, for Harry, for the fantasy that this is different because Kurt was a killer, because Logan was collateral in a righteous mission. But Harrison doesn't buy it. He throws Dexter's own rule back at him: you only kill people who deserve it. Logan didn't. There's no dark passenger here to blame, no monster in the closet, just Dexter, choosing himself again. And that's the moment the shift happens. The central question isn't, can Dexter escape anymore? It's, can he finally see himself the way Harrison does? He stops arguing. He stops building a new plan. The man who has narrated his life as an endless justification suddenly runs out of story. Instead, he walks Harrison through the shot. Literally, he positions his son. He places Harrison's hands. He guides the barrel to his own chest. To keep this clear, Dexter is not overpowered, not surprised, not cornered by the police. He orchestrates his own execution and hands his son the role of executioner. Look at his face in those final seconds. The focus is not just on the blood or the snow. It's on the way his expression softens when Harrison pulls the trigger. There's pain, yes, but beneath it, there's relief, acceptance, a strange peace. For once, the consequences are landing on him instead of ricocheting onto someone he claims to love. For once, Harrison might actually get to step out of the story instead of deeper into it. In this video, we're going to treat that decision as Dexter's most selfless act, not because it redeems him, but because it's the first time he chooses Harrison's future over his own need to survive, to keep playing the avenging angel. He doesn't go out in a blaze of defiance. He goes out acknowledging his own monstrosity and trusting that real love means ending the cycle, even if the cost is his life. And that's why this ending hits. A truly emotionless killer doesn't accept, much less design, his own death for someone else's sake. This only resonates because Dexter's feelings are real. Which raises one last question we need to unpack next. If his love is genuine, what does that make of all the horrors he committed in its name? If we track Dexter's entire trajectory from that first blood slide to his body in the snow, one pattern keeps cutting through the investigation, the code, and every careful plan. His biggest turning points aren't driven by logic. They're driven by love. Let's kick things off with the most brutal early example. In Season 1, Dexter finally meets someone who understands him completely. Brian. Same trauma, same urges, no judgment. On paper, the code should lose here. Brian is a killer. He fits. Dexter has every rational excuse to keep the one person who gets him and let Deb die. Instead, we watch him wrap that wire around his own brother's throat to save the sister he was trained to treat as camouflage. That's not the dark passenger. That's attachment taking control. From that point on, the central question isn't whether Dexter can feel. It's what those feelings do to his judgment. He stays in Miami long after the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation makes any rational killer disappear. Why? Deb, Rita, Astor, Cody, Harrison, family dinners with pastel cupcakes, birthday parties in the backyard, quiet mornings making pancakes before a night of dismemberment. The domestic imagery is relentless, and it's not accidental. The focus is not just on the horror of the kills, but on the bright, ordinary spaces that will be contaminated by them. Love keeps making him break his own rules. He spares Hannah when the code screams, she's too dangerous. He kills an innocent man in new blood after Harrison is threatened. He lets Trinity live long enough to study him, because he's chasing a fantasy of a killer who can also be a father, and Rita dies in a bathtub for that curiosity. To keep this clear, every time Dexter chooses love over procedure, someone else pays the price. And here's the paradox the series leans into. The very feelings that make Dexter more human also make him more dangerous. They push him into impulsive, high-risk behavior, confessing to Deb in the church, dragging her into the collapse of his double life, clinging to Iron Lake when every instinct for survival says run. His psychology doesn't evolve away from killing, it just keeps finding new justifications, wrapped in the language of protection and care. By the time Harrison pulls the trigger, we've come full circle. Dexter once killed family to save the person he loved most. Now he forces the person he loves most to kill him. This isn't redemption. It's the final expression of his tragic flaw. He cannot live without love, and he cannot love without destruction. So where does that leave the code, the dark passenger, the whole myth of control he's been selling us since season 1? To answer that, we have to look at the design of the system Harry built, and the hidden truth that was there from the beginning. Harry's code is supposed to keep everything clean. Clear targets, clean kills, no innocent blood. But if we track Dexter's life through one emotion, we watch the entire design fail in slow motion. That emotion is guilt, the one thing he keeps insisting he doesn't really believe in. Let's kick things off in those early seasons, when Dexter's narration keeps telling us he's empty, while his behavior quietly disagrees. When Dokes starts circling him, Dexter frames the problem as purely logistical. Dokes is a threat to the plan, a risk to his control. Yet the moment Leela blows Dokes up, Dexter doesn't feel triumph. He feels something closer to nausea. The perfect outcome, his biggest threat removed, the investigation derailed, lands like a stain he can't quite scrub out. Because he didn't choose it. And because an innocent man died as the Bay Harbor butcher. We see the same crack when collateral damage appears. That terrified kid in the trunk, the victims who get pulled into his orbit because he miscalculates a target or moves too slowly, Dexter always tells us the dark passenger is satisfied, but his eyes linger. He hesitates. He replays those failures. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on whether he feels bad, it's on how those moments start rewriting his internal story, from I'm a necessary monster to I might be the real problem. Rita's death detonates that shift. Trinity doesn't just kill Dexter's wife, he kills the fantasy that Dexter's violence can be quarantined from his home. The image of Harrison sitting in blood, mirroring Dexter's own origin, fuses guilt with biography. From that point on, Dexter doesn't just think of himself as a predator, he thinks of himself as a contagion. Every time he looks at Harrison, every time he remembers Rita's smile, the trajectory of his psychology bends toward one conclusion. People near him bleed. Then, Deb. First, she compromises herself, covering up his crimes, shooting LaGuerta, lying for him again and again. Each step she takes down that path is another indictment of the code. If the system Harry built was truly protecting the innocent, why is Deborah Morgan, the person Dexter loves most, the one it corrupts and ultimately destroys? When Deb dies, because of the chain reaction his life created, guilt stops being background noise. It becomes the operating principle. By the time we reach New Blood, Dexter's exile in Iron Lake reads less like strategic evasion and more like self-imposed punishment. He hides in a cabin, refuses real intimacy, and initially pushes Harrison away, not because he doesn't care, but because he's convinced his care is lethal. This is a guilt-driven plan, isolation as harm reduction. Yet the central question keeps pressing in. Can someone who truly feels nothing orchestrate his entire existence around preventing himself from ruining more lives? In this video, we're going to argue that by the time Dexter dies, the dark passenger is no longer in the driver's seat. Guilt is. His final choice to let Harrison kill him isn't the code speaking. It's the accumulated weight of every body, every broken mind, every ruined life. And that weight doesn't just end him. It sets up the final collapse of Harry's entire system. If guilt is what finally pulls the trigger on Dexter's life, recognition is the drug that keeps putting the gun back in his hand. Every time someone really sees him, the trajectory of his carefully managed world bends toward collapse. Let's kick things off with Brian. Season 1 gives Dexter the fantasy he didn't know he was chasing, a brother who not only knows the truth, but celebrates it. Brian doesn't question the dark passenger or the code, he glorifies the darkness itself. No rules, no limits, no pretense of control. The central question in that arc is brutal. If someone embraces the monster completely, is that love or annihilation? Dexter chooses Deb over that intoxicating recognition, but the damage is done. He's tasted what it feels like to be understood. Miguel Prado is the next escalation. Where Brian is blood, Miguel is status and validation, a powerful prosecutor who looks at Dexter's kills and calls them justice. Miguel doesn't just see the darkness, he wants to weaponize it. He pushes Dexter to abandon Harry's investigation, standards, and process, to kill for personal grudges. The code becomes optional, a prop. When Dexter realizes Miguel is out of control, he has to kill him, and that emotional crash reinforces a lethal equation. Being known turns allies into liabilities. Leela takes that high and twists it into romance. She doesn't just glorify Dexter's darkness, she eroticizes it, turning his addiction into something beautiful and transcendent. With her, the plan stops being containment and starts looking like liberation. Why follow the code at all if the fire feels this good? But Leela's version of recognition is unhinged. She kills Dokes to save Dexter, nearly burns Rita and the kids alive, and forces Dexter to confront a pattern. The more he lets someone in, the more bodies hit the floor. Lumen is different. She doesn't worship his darkness, she shares his mission. For a brief window, the focus is not just on ritual, but on shared justice. Dexter imagines a life where the kill room isn't a secret, where he and Lumen are partners in purpose. When she leaves after their revenge is complete, it's another crash. What does it mean when the one person who saw everything decides they don't need that world anymore? Hannah goes further. She doesn't demand he change or quit. She accepts the total package and offers escape. With her, Dexter seriously plans to walk away from Miami, from the code, from the entire structure of controlled killing. And then there's Harrison, the final mirror. Harrison sees more than Dexter admits, feels the consequences in Iron Lake, and ultimately rejects his father's justification completely. Along the way, every high of being seen accelerates the failure of Dexter's systems. Recognition feels like connection, but it detonates his plans, shreds his control, and proves that the one thing more dangerous than his secret is sharing it. In the next section, we'll track how that pattern finally collides with the only person he can't bear to lose. When that pattern finally collides with Deb, we have to ask the central question: Who taught Dexter to believe that love and honesty were mutually exclusive? To keep this clear, we have to go back to the original architect of his psychology, the man who didn't just train his methods, but trained his heart to play dead. Harry doesn't treat young Dexter as a traumatized child. He treats him as a problem to be managed. Instead of saying, "What happened to you was unbearable," he says, "This is what you are." He pathologizes the nightmares, the urges, the numbness, and then offers a plan. You can't feel like other people, so you need a code. Not therapy. Not healing. Rules. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that move because it's the original design flaw. The code is pitched as protection, but it's also a script that tells Dexter his inner life is irrelevant. If you're incapable of real feeling, then you never have to investigate your motives. You never have to ask, "Do I want this?" Only, "Does the code allow this?" That sounds like control. It's actually avoidance. The code becomes both leash and shield. It limits who he can kill, but it also shields him from looking too closely at why he kills at all. When he lets Trinity live long enough to study him as a perfect family man, Dexter tells himself it's professional curiosity within Harry's rules. In reality, he's chasing a fantasy of normalcy he secretly craves. The code gives him language to deny that craving, even as it drives his worst failures. And Harry never really leaves. Along the way, Harry's ghost keeps stepping into frame, scolding, warning, guiding. That spectral presence isn't supernatural. It's the internalized voice that insists, over and over, "You're a monster, not a man." When Dexter considers sparing Dokes, Harry appears to shut it down. When Dexter feels tenderness toward Rita or Harrison, Harry shows up like a prosecutor, cross-examining every feeling as a potential threat to the code. But reality keeps arguing back. Dexter kills Brian to save Deb, long before he can admit what that means. His grief for Rita in Season 4 doesn't look like performance. It looks like collapse. His panic when Harrison is in danger, his willingness in New Blood to expose himself rather than let his son become a killer, these are not the reactions of someone empty. The focus is not just on the murders here. It's on the collisions between Harry's narrative and Dexter's lived experience. Every time he feels love for Deb, or guilt over Rita, or genuine care for Harrison, he has to betray something. Either he betrays Harry's definition of him, or he betrays the people who prove that definition false. Which betrayal does he choose? Harry's greatest mistake wasn't teaching Dexter to kill. It was teaching him that every real emotion was evidence of malfunction. So when those emotions finally demand to be heard, they don't just challenge the code. They threaten to erase the only father who ever understood him. And in the next section, we'll see what happens when Dexter starts rewriting that script in real time. If Harry's voice is the script in Dexter's head, the double life is the stage where that script starts to tear. By the middle seasons, Dexter isn't just a predator with a code. He's a husband, a father, a brother, and a blood spatter analyst, trying to keep a dozen spinning plates of control from crashing at once. By day, we watch the logistics look almost elegant. He walks crime scenes with Masuka, jokes with Batista, turns blood patterns into neat stories for the investigation. At night, it's plastic sheeting, sedatives, and the ritual of the kill room. In between, there's Rita's barbecues, school events, Deb's meltdowns, and Harrison's first words. Every transition is lubricated by lies and rehearsed charm. Late night at the lab. Paperwork. I'm just tired. The plan is simple on paper. Compartmentalize. Work here. Murder there. Family in the margins. To keep this clear, we need to see how those margins shrink. The central question becomes, what happens when the emotional calendar starts competing with the kill schedule? Season 2 gives us an early answer. While the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation circles his ocean dumps, Dexter still sneaks away to stalk targets, even as Deb is barely holding it together after Brian. His sister is in therapy, shaking, begging for stability, and he's checking his watch, calculating if he can fit in a kill before dinner. Then the collisions start. He misses Rita's important moments because a target can't wait. He leaves baby Harrison with a babysitter so he can chase Trinity, only to realize that Trinity has already walked straight into his family home. The danger he thinks he can quarantine in abandoned buildings and dockyards leaks into the living room, the bathtub, the crib. Each major section will show a version of this same failure. The wall between lives isn't a wall at all. It's tracing paper. And when his attention splits, the perfect procedures crack. He forgets trophies, rushes cleanups, makes noise he would never have made in Season 1, leaving Miguel Prado's body to be found in a public place, keeping Lumen around long after the case should be closed. Under pressure, the code becomes negotiable, then optional. The operational failures are symptoms of a deeper problem. His feelings are no longer content to live in the background. There's a psychological toll we can track, almost scene by scene. Dexter gets more exhausted, more irritable, more impulsive. He snaps at Rita, barks at Deb, drives recklessly from a birthday party to a kill room like he's late for 2 incompatible jobs. He tells himself it's still about control, but the psychology has flipped. Now he's reacting, not planning. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this shift, because it's where the fantasy of the master strategist quietly dies. Pattern interrupt. If Dexter really felt nothing, this juggling act would be easy. You can't emotionally burn out if you don't burn at all, right? But he does. He cares that Harrison sees him as a good dad. He cares that Deb doesn't look at him like a monster. Those cares take up space. They demand time, attention, protection. The focus is not just on the kills anymore. It's on school photos, anniversaries, late night talks. By New Blood, the geography changes, but the pattern doesn't. Jim Lindsay chops wood, flirts with Angela, and plays the quiet boyfriend, then sneaks off to kill Matt Caldwell in the snow. He tries to reset the double life with new props, new lies, new routines. Yet the same pressure builds the moment Harrison reappears, and Angela's investigation heats up. Again, emotional commitments and homicidal rituals collide, and again, he believes he can micromanage both. Along the way, what looked like a logistical challenge reveals itself as an emotional pressure cooker. The more Dexter genuinely feels, the less room there is for the dark passenger to operate unseen. Every added role, husband, father, lover, mentor, tightens the seal. The explosion isn't hypothetical, it's guaranteed. The only open question is who gets hit by the shrapnel first, and in the next section, we'll watch that blast radius expand across every relationship he has left. That pressure cooker doesn't just blow outward, it scrambles Dexter's vision. The same man who can read a blood spatter pattern like scripture is almost blind when it comes to reading the people who love him. And that blind spot, more than any single mistake in a kill room, is what finally pulls his whole trajectory apart. Let's kick things off with his early arrogance. In Season 1, Dexter walks through Miami Metro like he's running a controlled experiment. Colleagues, suspects, even Rita and Deb are variables to be managed, not full people. He believes most humans are simple, predictable, easily steered by his normal guy act, bring donuts, crack a dry joke, not at the right time. In his psychology of the world, he's the only complex creature in the room. Everyone else is just stimulus and response. To keep this clear, we can track the pattern through 4 relationships. With Deb, he assumes fragility. She's needy, emotional, a liability he has to protect. So, he hides Brian, hides the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, hides Lila, convinced that knowing the truth would shatter her. But Deb keeps surviving the very traumas he thinks will destroy her. She claws through Brian's betrayal, Dokes' death, Lundy's murder. When she finally confesses she's in love with him, Dexter is stunned because he never credited her with that level of conflicted, painful self-awareness. He read her as weak, not as someone whose moral strength would eventually turn on him. With Miguel, it flips. Dexter underestimates ambition. He thinks he can hand Miguel the code like a leash and stay in control. Train him, correct him, rein him in. Instead, Miguel's ego and rage outrun every boundary Dexter imagines, and by the time Dexter realizes Miguel is killing for personal grudges, the plan has already collapsed into open warfare. Again, he misread the emotional depth, pride, humiliation, the intoxicating thrill of power. Lila is the same failure from another angle. Dexter thinks he's found someone broken in the same way he believes he is. He reads her as a chaotic but manageable escape valve, a convenient arsonist who will burn his problems and then disappear. He misses the instability, the obsession, the abandonment terror. When she blows up his apartment, kidnaps Astor and Cody, and tries to kill them. It's not a twist for her character. It's a correction of his shallow read. Even Lagerta is treated like background noise. He assumes her suspicion will fade under professional pressure, office politics, and his careful forensics. Instead, her persistence hardens into a private investigation that survives transfers, time, and direct danger. She doesn't stop because she can't. Her emotional investment in the truth is deeper than his investment in the mask. The central question isn't just whether Dexter feels, it's whether he'll admit that everyone else feels just as intensely. Harrison's moral clarity in New Blood, his horror at Dexter's rationalizations, is the final shock Dexter never planned for. Along the way, every major surprise he faces arrives from the same blind spot. Other people are not props. They have codes, loyalties, and breaking points of their own, and the next section will follow what happens once those inner lives finally refuse to orbit his. And once we see that, a darker pattern snaps into focus. Dexter doesn't just collide with other people's inner lives once. He keeps restaging the same emotional experiment, convinced the next variable will fix the design. To keep this clear, look at the roll call. Brian, Miguel, Lila, Lumen, Hannah, Harrison. On paper, they're wildly different. A long-lost brother, a charismatic Ada, a pyromaniac sponsor, a traumatized survivor, a poisoner turned lover, a damaged son. But psychologically, they're all drafted into the same role, the one person who might finally understand him, or at least make the monster feel less alone. With Brian, Dexter believes blood itself will bridge the gap Harry could never cross. With Miguel, he thinks a shared crusade will legitimize the code. With Lila, he lets himself believe he deserves to be accepted without rules. Lumen offers redemption through rescue. Hannah promises a life beyond Miami. And Harrison becomes the fantasy that fatherhood can overwrite everything that came before. Each time, Dexter tells us this time is different. Each time, the trajectory is identical. A bond forms. The code bends. Danger spikes. Someone innocent bleeds. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that cycle, because it's where Dexter's illusion of control quietly disintegrates. Emotion doesn't just complicate his plans, it rewrites his risk assessment. Miguel is too useful to vet properly. Lila is too necessary to cut off. Lumen is too broken to leave behind. Hannah is too perfect to distrust. Harrison is too important to keep at a distance. How many times do we watch him downgrade obvious red flags into acceptable risks because he's starving for connection? The central question is never simply whether these people will betray him. It's why Dexter keeps trusting the same story in his own head. His narration lags behind reality. He insists he's teaching Miguel control long after Miguel is improvising kills. He frames Lumen as a temporary ally, even as he rearranges his entire life around her vengeance. He calls Hannah a manageable exception, while ignoring that he's hiding evidence for a serial poisoner. We can see the feelings steering the wheel, while he's still narrating as if the code is driving. Each major section will show that the consequences scale up. Brian's death isolates him from the only person who got his darkness. Miguel's death detonates his professional life. Lila's chaos kills Dokes. Lumen's exit leaves him hollow on his wedding night. Hannah pulls Harrison into a fugitive fantasy. By New Blood, the cycle has nowhere left to go but patricide. And yet he tries one more time, one more bond, one more plan to finally make it work. The next section follows what happens when that last repetition hits a wall it can't escape. That wall isn't a cop, a camera, or a bad alibi. It's something Dexter has been denying since the pilot, the part of him that actually feels. To keep this clear, we have to name the thing he hides behind. The dark passenger. Dexter's private mythology for his compulsion to kill, framed as a separate entity riding along, steering the wheel. It's the voice that tells him he was born in blood, that the only way to maintain control is to obey the urge and follow the code Harry built around it. But watch how often he argues with it. In Season 1, he narrates the passenger like a demanding child, then turns around and kills Brian to save Deb. On paper, Brian is the perfect ally, the only person who understands his psychology. The passenger wants that connection. Yet in the kill room, Dexter looks at Deb duct taped to the table and makes a choice that cannot be explained by pure instinct. He murders his own brother to protect the sister he supposedly doesn't really love. From there, the internal debates get louder. Sometimes they're framed as talks with Harry's ghost, sometimes as cold narration that suddenly cracks. When he considers killing Dokes to preserve the plan, Harry appears in his mind like a prosecuting attorney, arguing the code. Dexter pushes back, not with logic, but with resentment and exhaustion. Why should he keep sacrificing the people around him to this rulebook? Why does every solution feel like another moral failure? Look at the nights he delays a kill to attend Harrison's birthday, or abandons a carefully prepared kill room because Rita calls. The passenger wants the ritual. Dexter walks out, leaving plastic and knives behind, because a crying toddler on a baby monitor pulls harder than the urge to slice. That is not the behavior of a man with no feelings. That is a man losing an argument with his own metaphor. The central question shifts. It's no longer, how do I feed the dark passenger without getting caught? It becomes, who am I if I don't obey it? Each major section will show that shift in real time, sparing Hannah when she fits the code, letting Jonah Mitchell live despite his guilt, prioritizing Deb's breakdown over Trinity's trail. Each time, emotion wins a small, precise victory. Along the way, Dexter's self-description quietly changes. Early on, he says, "I am a monster." By New Blood, he talks about Harrison as someone he loves, someone he wants to protect from the thing inside them. The focus is not just on hunger anymore, but on conflict. He stops saying, "I am my darkness," and starts acting like I am someone who has darkness and also has people I can't sacrifice. And yet, the passenger never disappears. It's still there in Iron Lake, pushing him toward Matt Caldwell, toward that last disastrous cover-up. The difference is what finally outvotes it: a conscience and a capacity for love that Harry's training tried to bury under plastic wrap. In the next section, we'll track how that buried part of Dexter doesn't just argue with the passenger. It engineers the final collapse of his entire design for living. That buried part of Dexter doesn't just engineer the collapse, it exposes the lie he's been telling from the beginning. Because once we look at what he's actually trying to do, the central question isn't why is he a monster? It's, was he ever really in control of the monster he built his life around? To keep this clear, we can map Dexter's core intentions. Follow Harry's code. Avoid hurting innocents. Protect the people he claims as his: Deb, Rita, Harrison. Keep the investigation away from his front door by hiding the Bay Harbor butcher behind meticulous forensics and ocean tides. On paper, it's a tight plan. A closed system. A life where the kill ritual, the family dinner, and the blood lab all reinforce a single illusion of control. But when we track the trajectory of outcomes, that system looks less like control and more like slow-motion collapse. Rita ends up dead in a bathtub because Dexter couldn't let go of the Trinity case, prioritizing emotional closure and curiosity over basic safety. Debra, the person he swears he's protecting, is first morally compromised in that church with Travis Marshall, then literally killed as a consequence of the chaos he drags into Miami. Harrison is traumatized twice, first by Rita's murder, then by being effectively orphaned, abandoned to a father who fakes his own death and later drags him into Iron Lake's spiral. Along the way, we get the collateral damage Dexter never intended but always enables. Dokes framed and blown up. LaGuerta executed in a shipping container. Innocence endangered every season by proximity to his double life. The focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on the radius of people who are only in danger because he needed a cover, a confidant, or a new start. And crucially, the failures don't happen in spite of his lack of feeling. They happen because of the feelings he won't admit he has. He hesitates with Brian because he wants a brother. He spares Hannah against all logic because she excites him. He lets Travis live long enough for Deb to walk into that church because he craves the theatrical, the meaningful finale. Over and over, he chooses emotional satisfaction, understanding, connection, poetic justice over the cold operational control he claims defines him. How many times does he tell us he's calculating, right after we've watched him improvise out of panic? That's where the narration becomes its own crime scene. In this video, we're going to keep pressing on that gap between what Dexter says and what we see. He retrofits a plan around whatever just happened, describing chaos as if it were choreography. By the time we reach Iron Lake, the voiceover insisting he's finally doing it right plays like dark comedy. We've seen this pattern before. We know what's coming. So no, Dexter was never fully in control. At best, he managed partial containment while his real emotions kept rewriting every scene he tried to script around a lie. In the next section, we'll follow how that lie finally meets something it can't narrate away, the moment Harrison refuses to play his part in Dexter's story. So when Harrison refuses to read the lines Dexter wrote for him, we hit the central question that's been hiding in plain sight since season 1. Which part of Dexter is the mask? Is he a monster pretending to be human, or a human pretending to be only a monster so he doesn't have to feel what he's already done? To keep this clear, we have to go back to the beginning, to the version of Dexter who narrates his life like a nature documentary. Early on, he tells us he has no real emotions, only reactions he's learned to copy. Rita is the perfect cover because she's damaged, low maintenance, unlikely to ask for too much. Deb is valuable because her love makes him look normal. His whole social world is framed as camouflage, an operational plan to avoid investigation and stay in control. But then the cracks start. When Brian offers him the fantasy of pure, code-free killing and total understanding, Dexter hesitates. The dark passenger should be thrilled. Instead, he kills his own brother to save Deb. On paper, that's a tactical move to preserve his cover. On screen, it's a man shaking, crying, holding his sister as the one person who gets him bleeds out on a plastic-wrapped floor. For someone who can't feel, that looks a lot like grief. In this video, we're going to keep circling that contradiction, because as the seasons progress, the trajectory of Dexter's life doesn't support his original story about himself. If the monster was the truth, and the human was the act, why do his biggest collapses come from love, not from bloodlust? Why is it that the moments where he seems most authentically himself aren't on the kill table, but in small, almost boring acts of care? Think about him holding Harrison for the first time, stunned that this crying bundle can quiet the dark passenger more effectively than any ritual. Think about him comforting Deb after she kills LaGuerta, taking on the guilt, reworking the code in real time just to keep her from shattering. Think about the way he moves Rita's body in the tub, whispering apologies to a woman who was never supposed to be more than a shield. These are not the gestures of a hollow mimic. These are the gestures of someone who feels too much and doesn't have a language for it. Which brings us to the psychology of the dark passenger itself. What if that voice isn't some separate entity riding shotgun, but a coping narrative, a way to quarantine his trauma and urges into something he can manage, categorize, and obey? Harry's code gives that narrative rules, turns it into a system. But every time Dexter breaks the code for Deb, for Rita, for Harrison, he's accidentally proving that his capacity for love, guilt, and responsibility is more fundamental than the script he's reciting about being empty. By the end, Dexter doesn't look like a monster flawlessly pretending to be human. He looks like a deeply damaged human clinging to the monster label, because it's easier than facing the full weight of his feelings, the consequences of every life he's touched. And the real horror is this. Once we see that, we have to ask one more question. If the dark passenger was a story all along, what happens when that story finally runs out of road? When that story runs out of road, we hit the question Dexter spends 8 seasons dodging. Not, is he a monster, but something much more uncomfortable. Given how often he actually feels something real, could he ever have changed? Or was tragedy wired into the trajectory from the start? To keep this clear, we can trace the few crossroads where his psychology and his circumstances briefly line up to offer an exit ramp. The first is brutal and intimate. Brian on the table in season 1. Dexter has what he claims to want, a brother who understands, a life without the mask, and he kills him to save Deb. That isn't the dark passenger. That's attachment, loyalty, love. If he can choose Deb over the fantasy of perfect understanding once, could he have chosen a different life entirely? Maybe. But notice what happens next. He folds that decision back into the code, tells himself he did the right kill, and the investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher lets him reframe sacrifice as proof his plan still works. Then Rita dies. The bathtub. Harrison in blood. The collapse of his suburban cover is also the collapse of his denial that his actions stay contained. For a few episodes, he's wrecked. He feels guilt, grief, genuine horror at the consequences. This is a second crossroads. He could confess to someone, seek therapy, admit that Harry's code has failed. Instead, he doubles down, deciding the solution is to refine the code, not abandon it. In this video, we're going to keep seeing that same move, feeling breaking through, then being repackaged as fuel. Lumen is the closest Dexter ever comes to a non-destructive rewrite. They share a mission that isn't about his hunger, but her healing. When she leaves at the end of season 5, it devastates him precisely because it proves the dark passenger is not inevitable for everyone. That realization could have pushed him toward real change. Instead, he interprets it as confirmation that only he is permanently broken. After La Guerta, the stakes shift. Killing Brian was self-protection for Deb. Killing La Guerta is active moral corruption of Deb. He watches her cross a line she can't uncross, watches the investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher twist into a personal execution, and still tells himself the code demanded it. If the central question is whether love and guilt are strong enough to override compulsion, this is where we see the scale tip the wrong way. Deb's death is the final catastrophic pattern interrupt. No more rationalizations, no more illusion of control. He pulls her life support himself. That is not a monster acting on pure instinct. That is a man drowning in accountability. And yet, even here, secrecy wins. He disappears into the storm instead of into a courtroom or a therapist's office. Could earlier honesty with Deb or with an actual therapist have evolved the code into something less destructive? Theoretically, yes. But Harry's training, the childhood trauma, and the absolute secrecy around his crimes mean that by the time his feelings fully wake up, tragedy isn't just likely, it's almost guaranteed. And that brings us to the final phase of Dexter's life, where those buried feelings don't just haunt him, they come back wearing Harrison's face. Those buried feelings don't just come back wearing Harrison's face. They come back as Dexter's final jury. To keep this clear, we have to look at where he ends up twice. Once as the silent lumberjack, once bleeding out in the snow. In both endings, Dexter technically survives his own collapse. In the original finale, he steers his boat into the storm, fakes his death, and reappears as a bearded ghost in flannel. In New Blood, he's alive right up until Harrison pulls the trigger. Different coasts, different names, same reality. He is physically alive, but stripped of every connection that ever gave his life shape. No Deb, no Rita, no Harrison, no Miami Metro to pretend he's part of something. Just the man, the urges, and the wreckage. Look at his demeanor in that lumberjack exile. No narration, no wry internal monologue, just a man punching a clock, staring past his own life. He's not reveling in freedom. He's not out there celebrating that he finally escaped the investigation, the code, the consequences. He looks numb and grim, like someone who has sentenced himself to a life without joy. That's not the fantasy of control he sold us for 8 seasons. That's ongoing internal torment. New Blood picks up that trajectory and makes it explicit. In Iron Lake, he builds another plan, another fake identity, another set of rules. But when Harrison shows up, the psychology shifts. The central question is no longer, can Dexter keep killing and stay hidden? It becomes, can this man actually be a father without destroying his son? And the answer lives in the way he looks at Harrison, not the way he talks about the dark passenger. He teaches Harrison, bonds with him, tries to redirect that violent streak. And for a moment, we see something Harry never accounted for. Dexter's capacity for love never died. It survived Rita's murder, Deb's death, and years of self-imposed punishment. When he smiles at Harrison's small victories, when he panics at the thought of losing him, that's not cover behavior. That's genuine attachment breaking through the code. So when Harrison confronts him, lays out the bodies, the lies, the collateral damage, Dexter's last plan finally collapses. The plan that he can be both killer and protector. He realizes he's become exactly what he claimed to hunt, and in that moment, he doesn't run. He guides Harrison's aim. He tells him where to shoot. He accepts it. Does that death bring peace? Partially. He dies, knowing Harrison might escape his shadow, but also knowing he's handed his son a loaded legacy of trauma. That's the paradox of Dexter's final state. He's punished and partially redeemed, not by the law, but by his own feelings, finally forcing him to admit what he is and what he's done. And along the way, they turn his greatest fantasy of control into his last unavoidable consequence. So, if Dexter's last act is driven by feeling, not by the code, what happens when we rewind the entire series with that in mind? The show we thought we were watching starts to look very different. The investigation is no longer just out there, in Miami Metro or Iron Lake. It's in his face, his hands, his silence. On a rewatch, let's kick things off with the smallest things. The micro expressions Dexter can't edit in post, the way his jaw locks for half a second when Brian dies in season 1, after that long, trembling hug, the way his shoulders physically cave at Rita's funeral, even as the narration insists he feels nothing. From a distance, he's the calm center of the storm. Frame by frame, he's a man barely holding the pose. In this video, we're going to treat those tiny glitches as evidence. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what Dexter says about himself, but on the gap between the monologue and the body language. Watch Brother Sam's shooting in season 6. Dexter tells us it's about losing a spiritual experiment. His eyes say something harsher. Pure animal panic at the idea that someone saw goodness in him and then died for it. The central question becomes, what is he trying hardest to hide from himself in this episode? Once you start watching that way, specific episodes turn into emotional crime scenes. Lagerta's execution in the shipping container is no longer just a tactical decision to preserve control. Look at his hands shaking as Deb begs him. Look at the split-second flinch when the gun goes off. That's not the dark passenger gliding through a clean plan. That's a collapse, and his body knows it before his narration ever will. Deb's hospital scenes work the same way. Dexter stands by her bed, talking about inevitability, about consequences, about the code unraveling, but his whole posture gives him away. He leans in, then pulls back. He reaches for her hand, then hesitates. He's staging a goodbye he refuses to name as grief. On rewatch, ask yourself, if this is a man who can't feel, why does every muscle in his body act like it's breaking? And then there's New Blood, the final moments with Harrison. Dexter frames it as mercy, as necessary containment of the monster. Watch his face the instant Harrison calls him out. There's shock, there's recognition, there's something like relief. He's been running an entire season-long plan to stay numb. One honest look from his son detonates it. Along the way, the tone of the whole series shifts. It stops playing as a procedural about a clever killer escaping justice and starts reading like a tragedy about a man losing a war against his own humanity. Every joke at the lab, every family barbecue, every kill room quip becomes heavier, more ominous, more heartbreaking. Because we can see what he's bleeding to keep buried. And once you see those feelings, you can't unsee them. The question is, what happens when we apply that lens to the very origins of the code itself. Because once we question the code, we're not just talking about Dexter anymore. We're talking about us, about the stories we build to explain why we don't feel that much, or aren't the emotional type, or just do what needs to be done. Let's kick things off with Dexter's favorite line of defense. I don't have feelings like other people. On the surface, it's a clinical diagnosis with a ritual attached. In practice, it's the same narrative a lot of us use after trauma, burnout, or years of survival mode. We say, we're fine. We say, we're built different. We say, we're just being rational. Underneath, there's a crime scene of unprocessed fear, shame, and grief that never got an investigation. From Harry's garage lectures to those early season voiceovers, Dexter learns that survival means performance. Smile at Rita, protect Deb, show up at work. The plan is simple. Separate the monster from the mask. We do a softer version of that all the time. Work self, family self, private self. Each one with its own code, its own rules, its own acceptable range of emotion. To keep this clear, compartmentalizing feels like control at first. We think we're keeping the darkness in one box and the vulnerability in another, safely away from the places that matter. But emotions don't respect those boundaries. Dexter's guilt over Brian doesn't stay in the kill room. It bleeds into his protectiveness of Deb. His grief for Rita doesn't stay in that blood-soaked bathroom. It warps every decision he makes about Harrison. What starts as neat psychological folders becomes a leaking file cabinet. Here's the pattern interrupt. Dexter's biggest lie isn't that he's a monster. It's that being a monster is easier than being human. Calling himself inhuman is his shortcut around responsibility. If he's just a predator, then the consequences of what he does to Deb, to Rita, to Harrison are tragic but inevitable. If he's a damaged human who loves them, then he has to face the fact that he keeps choosing his urges over the people he claims to protect. That's a much heavier investigation. The focus is not just on murder here, it's on how denial scales. We might not have kill rooms, but we ghost people instead of admitting we're hurt. We bury ourselves in work rather than naming our anger. We say we're over it, while our behavior quietly collapses our relationships. Every time Dexter ignores his guilt, it doesn't disappear. It compounds interest. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that cost, because acknowledging guilt, grief, love, and fear early is painful, but it's also pressure release. When Dexter refuses that release, those same feelings explode as panic, rage, and self-sabotage in later seasons. His entire trajectory becomes a cautionary tale, not about serial killing, but about what happens when you build your whole life on the lie that you don't really feel. And if that lie starts with Harry's code, where exactly do we see it begin to crack? We've watched the lie start to crack. Now we need to see the whole fracture pattern, because when we pull back, every major turning point in Dexter's life is not about a brilliant plan executed in perfect control. It's about a man ambushed by feelings he swears he doesn't have. Let's kick things off where the illusion first really buckles. Brian on the table in season 1. Dexter has the fantasy right there, gift-wrapped, a brother who understands him. No more pretending, no more code. And he kills that fantasy for Deb. That's not the dark passenger making a tactical choice. That's love, raw and terrified, choosing his sister over the only person who ever offered to accept him completely. From there, the trajectory only gets messier. Rita's murder is the moment the investigation into Dexter's own psychology goes from theory to evidence. He walks into that bathroom, and the plan of the perfect cover family dies on impact. What leaks out in its place is guilt, not just at losing her, but at knowing his double life pulled Trinity straight into their home. The monster understands cause and effect. The man feels responsible. Then we get Lumen. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. When Dexter lets himself hope, everything destabilizes. With Lumen, he steps outside the code for someone who is not a deserving target at all. He wants to believe that shared violence can cleanse them both. When she leaves, healed enough to walk away, we see another facet. Hope that doesn't end in death, but in abandonment. He can give her freedom, just not himself. Brother Sam's death hits a different nerve. Dexter isn't just sad. He is shaken by the possibility of grace. He stands in that church, begging for a sign, and what answers him is not God, but his own rage. Love, guilt, hope, despair. Each new season adds another layer he can't narrate away. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on isolated scenes, but on how they knot together. Corrupting Deb to save himself, then losing her in that hospital, fuses all three emotional categories at once. Love for her, guilt for dragging her into his world, and the horrifying recognition that he is the common denominator in every collapse. Exiling himself into that storm is not a cool, strategic reset. It's punishment. And finally, New Blood strips away any remaining ambiguity. When Dexter lets Harrison kill him, the code is gone, the plans are gone, the performance is gone. What's left is a single, catastrophic act of selflessness. The central question stops being, can Dexter feel? And becomes, why does he only act on those feelings after the worst possible damage is done? That's the tragedy. Not absence, but delay. Not emptiness, but emotions arriving like aftershocks. Watched as a whole, Dexter isn't the story of a perfect killer maintaining control. It's the story of a man whose real feelings keep tearing that illusion apart. And in the next section, we'll see how the code itself was never built to survive that pressure. And this is where we hand the investigation over to you. If Dexter's life is really a slow collapse of the illusion that he feels nothing, then the central question becomes personal. When did that illusion break for us? Not in theory, in one concrete scene, one line, one look. So think back through the seasons and pin it down. What was the exact moment you realized, wait, he actually cares? Was it Brian on the table in season 1? When Dexter kills the only person who understands him to save Deb? Was it something small with Rita, like the way he watches her sleep after the little Chino attack, realizing his cover is now a family he can't lose? Maybe it's Harrison, blood on his cheek in that bathroom, when Dexter's narration about control suddenly can't compete with the raw panic on his face. Or was it later, with Deb in the shipping container, when the code and every plan he ever made fall apart in a single, devastated, "Oh my God, Dex." Drop your moment in the comments and be specific. Episode, scene, the line that did it. To keep this clear, tell us not just what happened, but how it changed your read on his psychology. Did you start seeing him as a damaged person fighting himself, or as a killer whose feelings only make the consequences worse for everyone around him? And then push it one step further. Do you think Dexter could have changed if he'd acknowledged those feelings earlier? If Harry hadn't drilled in the story that he was a monster? If the code had been a path out instead of a cage, does this trajectory bend anywhere other than tragedy? Or was every flicker of love for Rita, Deb, or Harrison always going to end exactly where it does, in exile, grief, and another body on the floor? In this video, we're going to keep using that emotion versus narration lens, and we want you to try it too. Rewatch a key episode with friends or in a community stream. Season 1's finale with Brian, Rita's death, Deb's last episode. Watch Dexter's face, his pauses, his failures of control, and then listen to what his voiceover claims he's feeling. Where do they match? Where do they violently disagree? We'd also love to see a living poll in the comments. Rank the most devastating emotional moments in the series and tell us how each one shifted your perception of Dexter. Did Harrison finding Hannah and Dexter in Argentina change more for you than Deb pulling the trigger in the church? Did New Blood's ending finally make him human or erase that possibility? Along the way, we're building toward more deep dives into characters who think they're in control while everything quietly unravels. If this breakdown made you see Dexter as more human and more dangerous because of it, subscribe, share it with someone who still believes in the perfect plan, and stay with us, because the next character on the table might be someone you're still convinced is untouchable. And if Dexter isn't untouchable, we have to ask the central question, hiding underneath all the blood and plastic: whose emotions are we actually following? Because for all the voiceover and dark passenger psychology, Dexter is not the one who really teaches us how to feel about this world. Deborah Morgan is. Let's kick things off with something uncomfortable. When a body drops, Dexter narrates. Deb reacts. He dissects the scene. She bleeds on it. The shaky breathing. The profanity. The tears in the car after a crime scene that hits too close. That's not just character color. That's the show handing us a surrogate who doesn't have a code, a plan, or a compartmentalized dark passenger. Deb is raw, unfiltered consequence. To keep this clear, think about the early seasons. Dexter stands over a dismembered body, clinically cataloging. Deb is the one who throws up, who rages at the investigation hitting a wall, who breaks down when the ice truck killer targets her. We might admire Dexter's control, but we inhabit Deb's panic. She reacts the way we would if we weren't hiding behind a clever internal monologue. And then there's her love for Dexter, which is its own slow-motion collapse. On the surface, it's simple sibling loyalty. The little sister who worships the big brother who saved her from their father's distance. Underneath, it's hero worship, a desperate need for someone solid in a life defined by abandonment. Then the writers twist the knife with that romantic confusion phase, where therapy and trauma blur into attraction. It's uncomfortable by design. We're watching a woman trying to name a feeling that has been manipulated by secrets her entire life. The focus is not just on what Deb feels, but on how every major shift in Dexter's emotional trajectory runs straight through her. Killing Brian is not a triumph of the code. It's a sacrifice of the only person who truly understood him for Deb's life. LaGuardia's death is not just a tactical move. It's the moment Deb crosses Dexter's line for him, and something in her breaks. Her spiral into pills, panic, and self-disgust tracks the real consequences of his so-called control. Look at Dexter's big, feeling milestones through Deb's eyes. Her horror in the shipping container, her fury in the car after she learns the truth, her brief, fragile acceptance when she helps him and then hates herself for it. We can argue about what Dexter feels, but we cannot argue with what it does to her. Her pain is the proof. Pattern interrupt. If Dexter truly felt nothing, why does Deb's death end him? Not legally, existentially. When he carries her body to the boat in that storm, the plan, the code, the investigation, all of it is gone. What's left is a man whose emotional center has been ripped out. Deb is the character who proves Dexter isn't alone in his feelings. She feels enough for both of them until it destroys her. And in that destruction, we see the real cost of every emotion he tried to deny. Along the way, that sets us up for one last angle. What happens when Dexter finally turns that emotional wreckage onto himself? When Dexter finally points the gun at himself through Harrison's hands, the emotional wreckage we've been tracking stops being abstract. It becomes an inheritance, not just for us as viewers, but for this kid who grew up in the blast radius of every plan, every lie, every collapse. To keep this clear, Harrison doesn't just inherit trauma. He inherits a narrative, a story about who his father was and what violence is for. Harry gave Dexter a code. Dexter, in those last minutes in the snow, gives Harrison something else. A model of someone who loved his son enough to die rather than keep pretending this cycle could be controlled. That doesn't erase the blood, but it does mean Harrison's identity isn't built only on being the son of a monster. It's also built on being the one person Dexter finally chose to protect without loopholes. The central question for Harrison is what he does with that story. Does he repeat the pattern, use his own pain as justification to become a New Bay Harbor butcher? Or does he treat his father as a cautionary investigation into what not to become? New Blood flirts with both trajectories. Harrison is drawn to the thrill of confronting Kurt. He clearly feels the rush of power, the illusion of justice through violence that seduced Dexter for 8 seasons and a revival. But he also sees the consequences more clearly than Dexter ever did. That's why his horror at Matt Caldwell's death matters so much. Dexter frames it as self-defense, as a necessary kill. Harrison watches the lie in real time. He sees that there was no imminent threat, no code being honored, just his father's compulsion, dressed up again as control. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between intention and outcome. And Harrison is the first character who refuses to close that gap with rationalizations. His moral clarity in that moment suggests a stronger internal compass, a psyche less willing to bend reality to protect a fantasy. And yet, he still pulls the trigger. That's the paradox. Harrison is sickened by Dexter's unnecessary kill, but he also accepts Dexter's final logic that the only way to stop this escalating failure is to end it at the source. Is that justice? Is it mercy? Or is it a teenager being forced into an impossible role because every adult before him refused to face what Dexter really was? The focus is not just on whether Harrison is fixed by that act. He won't be. The scars won't fade. But Dexter's last decision cracks the myth that the code can save anyone. And that crack might be the space Harrison needs to build something different. So where should that story go? Do we want a whole new series charting Harrison's trajectory? Or is Dexter's legacy more powerful left in ambiguity, with the gunshot echoing and no neat epilogue to reassure us he turned out fine? And maybe that's the point. We don't get to watch Harrison's investigation of himself play out in neat seasons and arcs. We're left with a question hanging in the air. If Dexter's story is what happens when you deny your own feelings, what happens to the next generation? if they faced theirs head on instead. Because if Dexter truly had no feelings, his story would have ended quietly in season 1. The ice truck killer would have been a professional problem. The code would have held. And the Bay Harbor butcher case would have closed with someone else in handcuffs. Instead, every real emotion dragged him deeper into tragedy. Every time the mask slipped, the plan bent, then broke, then collapsed. From the outside, it looks like a saga of kills, investigations, and near misses. But the focus is not just on the bodies. What makes Dexter unforgettable isn't his plastic and his knives. It's the moments when the narration says, "I don't feel," and the image on screen quietly proves that a lie. Holding Brian on that blood-soaked table, staring at Rita's body in the bathtub as Harrison cries in the next room, watching Deb bleed out in his arms, and realizing the code never protected the one person who loved him before the monster had a name. To keep this clear, think about the final images the series leaves us with. Dexter cradling baby Harrison in Rita's blood, swearing he can stop the cycle. Dexter holding Deb on the boat, lowering her into the water like one more victim, even though she's the only person he never wanted on a table. Harrison holding the gun in the snow, hands shaking as he looks at the father who finally admits, "I do deserve this." 3 generations linked by one man's inability to outrun his own heart. These aren't just plot points. They're a map of a psychology that keeps insisting it's empty, while every major decision is secretly driven by attachment, fear, and love. The central question stops being, is Dexter a real psychopath? And becomes, what does it cost to build your entire identity on the denial of your own feelings? Along the way, we watch that cost spread from Harry's garage to Miami Metro to Iron Lake. In this video, we're going to leave you with an invitation more than an answer. When you watch other shows, other monsters, other masterminds who claim they don't care, ask yourself, what are they feeling that they refuse to admit? And how is that shaping every plan, every failure, every consequence? If this changed how you see Dexter, share it with someone who still thinks he never felt anything real, and see if they still believe that after watching.